The divorce papers felt heavier than they should have. Jake Brennan sat in the corner booth of a diner on Detroit's east side, watching rain streak down the window while his coffee went cold. Across the table, Sarah looked tired. Not angry anymore, just tired. That was somehow worse. She pushed the manila folder toward him with two fingers, careful not to let their hands touch. 8 years of marriage reduced to a stack of legal documents in the scratch of a pen. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with that particular frequency that made Jake think of interrogation rooms and hospital waiting areas. Places where life changed and there was nothing you could do but sit there and take it. "I'm not leaving because you're a bad person, Jake," Sarah said quietly. Her voice had that clinical tone she used when she was trying not to cry. She was a doctor. She'd learned to compartmentalize. "I'm leaving because you've given up. On us. On yourself. On everything." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the words died somewhere between his chest and his throat because she wasn't wrong. He'd been going through the motions for months now, ever since the plant laid him off, ever since he stopped returning calls from his family in Montana, ever since he started seeing his own face in the mirror and not recognizing the man looking back. "I know," was all he said. Sarah's composure cracked just a little. Her eyes went glassy. "I loved who you were, Jake. The Marine who came home and built a life. But you're not him anymore. And I don't think you even want to be." She stood up, gathered her coat, paused at the edge of the booth like she was waiting for him to say something. Anything. Give her one reason to sit back down. But Jake just stared at the papers and Sarah walked away. The bell above the diner door chimed once. Then she was gone. Jake sat there for another hour. The waitress refilled his coffee 3 times without asking. The rain kept falling. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew this was rock bottom. 32 years old, no wife, no job, no direction. Just a studio apartment in a city that felt like it was crumbling around him and a skill set nobody seemed to need anymore. He'd been an engineer at the auto plant, good with his hands, could take apart an engine and put it back together better than it was before. But the plant modernized. Robots didn't need health insurance or bathroom breaks. 247 people got pink slips the same day. Jake was number 63. His phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, but something made him look. An email from a law firm in Montana, Coleman and Associates. Subject line read, "Urgent, estate of William J. Brennan." Jake's grandfather, Bill. The email was formal, impersonal. William Brennan had passed away on March 15th. A will reading was scheduled for March 22nd at 10 a.m. at the firm's offices in Missoula. His presence was required, not requested, required. Jake stared at the words. His grandfather was dead. He should feel something. Grief, loss, something. But he'd been numb for so long that even this just felt like another item on a list of things going wrong. He hadn't been back to Montana in 8 years, not since he enlisted in the Marines, not since he decided that anywhere was better than the place that raised him. The last time he'd spoken to Bill was 3 years ago, a phone call that lasted maybe 10 minutes. Awkward small talk about weather and crops and things neither of them cared about. Jake had meant to call more, meant to visit, but there was always something, work, marriage, the comfortable lie that there would be more time later. Now there wasn't. The flight to Montana left the next morning. Jake packed a single duffel bag. Everything he owned fit into a 12 by 12 storage unit in a car he'd already decided to sell. Detroit in his rearview mirror felt like watching a city he'd never really belonged to anyway. The plane climbed through gray clouds and broke into sunlight somewhere over Wisconsin. From 30,000 feet, America looked peaceful. Geometric fields, rivers like veins, roads connecting small towns that probably hadn't changed much in 50 years. Jake pressed his forehead against the cold window and thought about Bill. The old man had been a fixture of his childhood. Quiet, steady, the kind of man who showed love through teaching rather than talking. He'd taught Jake to drive a tractor when he was 10, taught him to read weather patterns and fix anything that broke, taught him that a man's worth wasn't in what he said, but what he did. And Jake had repaid that by disappearing. The plane touched down in Missoula just after 2 in the afternoon. March in Montana meant the mountains still wore snow like a blanket pulled up to their chins. The air was thin and cold and tasted like pine. Jake rented a car and drove north on Highway 93, watching the landscape open up into valleys that seemed to go on forever. This was big sky country. That's what the license plate said. And it wasn't false advertising. The Brennan Ranch sat 40 miles outside of Missoula, tucked into a fold of land where the Bitterroot Mountains met the valley floor. 800 acres of rolling grassland, pine forest, and creek bottom that had been in the family for 4 generations. The main house was a 2-story log structure that Bill's grandfather had built in 1923. It looked exactly like Jake remembered. Solid, permanent, the kind of place that would still be standing when everything else had turned to dust. Ryan's truck was already in the driveway. Jake's cousin, 37 years old and every bit the Montana rancher. Broad shoulders, weathered hands, the kind of tan that came from years under an unforgiving sun. He stepped out onto the porch as Jake pulled up. Didn't wave, just stood there with his arms crossed in an expression that could have been carved from the same granite as the mountains behind him. 8 years, Ryan said as Jake climbed out of the rental. 8 years you don't come home, don't call, nothing. And now you show up because there's a will to read. Ryan, you even know when the funeral was, Jake, last week. Tuesday. Where were you? Jake felt the words like a fist to the gut. He hadn't known. The email from the lawyers hadn't mentioned it. I didn't know. Nobody called me. We tried. Phone went straight to voicemail, every time. Ryan's voice was flat, matter of fact, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been yelling. But that's how it's always been with you, isn't it? The world's happening and you're just somewhere else. Jake wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain about the divorce and the way Detroit had chewed him up and spit him out. But what was the point? Ryan was right. He checked out of his own life, checked out of his family. And now Bill was gone, and there wasn't a chance to fix it. I'm sorry, Jake said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Ryan studied him for a long moment. Then something in his expression softened just slightly. You look like hell. Feel worse. Well, you're here now. That's something. Ryan turned and headed back into the house. Might as well come in. Coffee's on. The inside of the house smelled like coffee and wood smoke, and something else Jake couldn't quite name. Memory, maybe? The walls were lined with photographs. 4 generations of Brennans staring down from frames. Bill as a young man in a Marine Corps uniform. Bill and Elizabeth on their wedding day. Bill with his children, his grandchildren. A visual history of a life fully lived. Jake stopped in front of one photograph in particular. Him at maybe 12 years old, standing next to Bill in front of an old John Deere tractor. Both of them covered in grease and grinning. He remembered that day. They'd spent 6 hours rebuilding the engine. Bill had let him do most of the work, only stepping in when Jake got stuck. When it finally roared to life, Bill had put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Good work, son. You've got the touch." He kept that photo on his desk, Ryan said from the doorway, right up until the end. Jake felt something crack inside his chest. When did he get sick? About 6 months ago, started forgetting things. Little stuff at first, then bigger stuff. Doctor said it was the beginning of dementia. But Bill, he was stubborn, kept working the land, kept taking care of things. Ryan poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Jake. The last month was hard. He knew he was losing himself. You could see it in his eyes. That scared him more than dying, I think. I should have been here. Yeah, you should have. Ryan didn't say it mean, just honest. But he never held it against you. Used to say you were out there finding your way. Said every man's got to walk his own road. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Jake had eaten countless meals as a kid. The surface was scarred with decades of use, coffee rings and knife marks and the initials Jake had carved into one corner when he was 9 and thought he wouldn't get caught. Bill had found it, made Jake sand and re-oil the entire table as punishment. Then he'd left the initials, said they were part of the table's story now. What's the situation with the ranch? Jake asked. Ryan's jaw tightened. Complicated. I've been managing it for the last 5 years. Bill signed most of it over to me when he started getting forgetful. But there's parts he kept separate. Legal stuff I don't fully understand. That's what tomorrow's about. The lawyers sorting through everything. And the rest of the family. Your dad didn't come. Said he couldn't get time off work. Ryan's tone made it clear what he thought about that excuse. Your aunts and uncles will be at the reading. Couple of cousins. Everyone wants to know what they're getting. Jake heard the bitterness there. Understood it. Bill had built something real out here. Turned 800 acres into a legacy. And now the vultures were circling to see what they could pick from the carcass. They finished their coffee in silence. Ryan showed Jake to the guest room, same room he'd stayed in every summer when he was a kid. Same quilt on the bed, same view of the mountains through the window. Jake sat on the edge of the mattress and felt the weight of exhaustion settle into his bones. Not just from the travel, from everything. His phone buzzed. Sarah, a text message, just 3 words. "I'm sorry, Jake." He stared at those words for a long time. Then he turned off the phone and lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling, thought about Bill in this house, alone, losing his mind piece by piece. Thought about 8 years of silence and all the things he'd never said. Thought about how you could spend your whole life running from something only to discover you were actually running from yourself. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it was full of dreams that felt more like memories. Bill teaching him to fish in the creek. Bill showing him how to shoe a horse. Bill sitting on the porch at sunset with a cup of coffee, watching the day end in silence. A man comfortable with who he was and what he'd built. Jake woke before dawn. The house was quiet. He pulled on his clothes and walked outside. The air was cold enough to hurt his lungs. Stars were still visible in the western sky, fading as the east began to lighten. He walked to the old barn, the one Bill had built himself back in the 70s. The boards were weathered gray, but the structure was sound. Bill had built things to last. Inside, the barn smelled like hay and leather and motor oil. Old farm equipment lined the walls. A 1952 Farmall tractor that Bill had restored by hand. Plows and harrows and tools Jake couldn't even name. In the corner, covered by a tarp, was something Jake recognized. The old John Deere from the photograph. He pulled back the tarp. The green paint was faded, but someone had kept it clean, maintained, even though it probably hadn't run in years. There was a workbench along the back wall. Bill's workspace. Everything organized with the precision of a man who believed in order. Jake ran his hand along the surface, found a coffee can full of bolts and screws, a cigar box containing old receipts, and underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, a small leather-bound journal. Jake opened it. Bill's handwriting, dates going back to the early 2000s. Not a diary exactly, more like notes, observations, weather patterns, crop rotations, repairs that needed doing, the mundane record of a life lived close to the land. Jake flipped through the pages, stopped on an entry from 3 years ago. The date matched the last phone call they'd had. "Talked to Jake today. He sounds lost. Tried to tell him there's always a place here for him. Don't think he heard me. Or maybe he did, and that's what scares him. Coming home means facing what you left behind. Not everyone's ready for that." Jake closed the journal carefully, put it back where he found it, walked out of the barn into the growing light of dawn. The mountains were turning pink. The valley was waking up. And somewhere inside himself, Jake felt something shift. Not healing, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. The acknowledgement that he'd been broken and that pretending otherwise hadn't helped. The law office of Coleman and Associates occupied the second floor of a brick building in downtown Missoula. The kind of place that had been there since Montana was still territory. Jake arrived at 9:45. Ryan was already there. So were Jake's aunts and uncles, his cousins. 12 people total sitting in a waiting room that smelled like old paper and furniture polish. Nobody was talking. Everyone looked at Jake when he walked in. Some nodded, some didn't. At precisely 10 o'clock, a secretary called them into a conference room. Long table, leather chairs, windows overlooking the street. At the head of the table sat George Coleman, 78 years old, white hair, sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been Bill's lawyer for 40 years. More than that, he'd been his friend. "Thank you all for coming," George said. His voice had the gravel of age, but the clarity of a man who still had his wits. "I know this is difficult. William Brennan was a good man, a client, a friend, and I'm going to honor his wishes as he laid them out." George opened a leather folder, pulled out a stack of documents, started reading. The language was formal, impersonal. Ryan received 650 acres of the main ranch, the house, the equipment, the cattle operation. Jake's aunts and uncles received smaller parcels, stakes in various investments, reasonable shares of a life's accumulation. Jake listened to his name not being called, watched as everything Bill had built was divided among people who would probably sell it or squander it or turn it into something Bill never intended. And still his name didn't come up. Not for land, not for money, not for anything. When George finished reading, the room was silent. Jake's Aunt Catherine broke it. That's everything? That's everything listed in the primary will, yes. Jake didn't get anything. This from his Uncle Thomas. Not sympathetic, just curious. William left specific instructions regarding Jacob. George looked directly at Jake. There's a letter, for you only, to be opened in private. The other relatives filed out. Some stopped to offer condolences that felt hollow. Most just left. Ryan lingered at the door. You coming back to the ranch? Later, Jake said. I need some time. Ryan nodded and left. The room emptied until it was just Jake and George. The old lawyer reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. Heavy paper. Jake's name written across the front in Bill's distinctive handwriting. Shaky, but legible. I don't know what's in this, George said. Bill sealed it himself 3 months ago, made me promise to give it to you and only you. He slid the envelope across the table. Take your time. The office is yours as long as you need it. George left, closed the door behind him. Jake sat alone in the conference room with the envelope in his hands. Outside, the March sun was trying to burn through the cloud cover. Not quite succeeding. He turned the envelope over, ran his thumb along the seal, then he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Bill's handwriting, the letters larger than in the journal, harder for failing hands to form. Jake, if you're reading this, you came back. That's all I needed. Not for the others, for you. I didn't leave you land or money in the will because those aren't the things you need. What you need is truth, purpose, a reason to stop running. I'm giving you all three. Under the foundation of horse barn number 3, the one we poured concrete for in 2005, there's a safe. The combination is 0715. Your birthday. Inside you'll find something I've kept hidden for 60 years. Something I promised to protect until my last breath. Now I'm passing that promise to you, because you're the only one I trust to do what's right. Not what's easy. What's right. Choose well, son. Choose like the man I know you are, not the man you've been pretending to be. I love you. Always have. Always will. Bill. Jake read it twice. 3 times, the words didn't change. Horse barn number 3. A safe. A secret 60 years old. He folded the letter carefully, put it in his jacket pocket, walked out of the conference room. George was in his office. Looked up when Jake appeared in the doorway. You okay, son? Bill mentioned you were friends. Best friend I ever had. Knew him since we were both 20 years old. Then maybe you know what this is about. Jake showed him the letter. George read it. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or concern. I know about the safe. I don't know what's in it. Bill never told me. Said some things were too heavy to share until the time was right. But you have an idea. Ideas aren't facts, Jake. What I think doesn't matter. What Bill wanted you to find does. George handed the letter back. The barn's still standing. Safe should still be there. Question is, are you ready for whatever it is? Jake didn't have an answer to that. He thanked George and left. Drove back to the ranch. It was past noon when he pulled up. Ryan's truck was gone. Good. He needed to do this alone. Horse barn number 3 sat at the eastern edge of the property, smaller than the main barn. Bill had used it for storage the last few years. Jake found a crowbar in the tool shed, walked to the barn. The concrete foundation was exactly as he remembered. A solid slab poured in the summer of 2005. He'd been 16. Bill had let him help, taught him how to mix concrete, how to level it, how to finish it smooth. They'd worked in the heat for 3 days, just the two of them. Bill had been 68, still strong, still capable. He'd talked while they worked, told stories about Korea, about meeting Elizabeth, about building a life one decision at a time. Jake remembered thinking his grandfather was the strongest man he'd ever known. Not physically, but in the way he carried himself, like he knew who he was and was comfortable with it. Now Jake wedged the crowbar into the edge of the foundation, started prying. The concrete was thick, but there was a seam he hadn't noticed before. Deliberately hidden, but there if you knew to look. He worked for 20 minutes, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cold. Finally, a section lifted free. Underneath was a hollow space lined with metal, and in that space a green military surplus safe, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, Heavy gauge steel, a combination lock on the front. 0715. Jake's hands were shaking as he spun the dial. Right, left, right, left. The final number clicked into place. The lock opened. Jake lifted the lid. Inside were layers of oilcloth. He peeled them back carefully. Found photographs first. Black and white, faded with age. The top one stopped his breath. A young Bill in Marine Corps dress uniform, standing next to a woman. She was Asian, beautiful, delicate features and dark eyes. They were holding hands, both smiling. Behind them was a building with Korean characters on the sign. On the back, written in Bill's younger, steadier hand, Bill and Ruth, Seoul, Korea, June 1954. Jake stared at the photo. Bill had never mentioned anyone named Ruth, never talked about being married before Elizabeth. He dug deeper, found a marriage certificate, issued by the United States Army Command, Korea, William J. Brennan and Ruth Min June Park, June 23, 1954. A birth certificate, born at Seoul Army Hospital, April 17, 1955. Mother, Ruth Park Brennan. Father, William J. Brennan. Name of child, Margaret Ruth Brennan. A military death report, Ruth Min June Park Brennan. Deceased November 3, 1955. Cause, vehicular accident. Military Jeep rollover in heavy rain. Next of kin, William J. Brennan, husband. Adoption papers. Margaret Ruth Brennan, legally adopted by James and Dorothy Sullivan of Spokane, Washington. February 1956. Birth father William J. Brennan relinquishes all parental rights. Another envelope, sealed. Words on the outside, don't open until you found Margaret. Jake sat back on his heels. The cold concrete pressed through his jeans. Around him the barn was silent, except for the wind moving through gaps in the boards. His grandfather, the man he thought he knew, had been married before to a Korean woman, had a daughter, given her up for adoption, and hidden it for 6 decades. None of it made sense. Bill had been the most honest man Jake had ever known. If he'd had a secret this big, there must have been a reason. A good reason. Or at least a reason that made sense to a 26-year-old Marine who just lost his wife and was staring down at a baby he couldn't care for. Jake gathered everything carefully, put it back in the safe except for one photograph. Bill and Ruth, young and in love and not knowing what was coming. He carried the safe back to his rental car, locked it in the trunk, stood in the driveway for a long moment trying to decide what to do next. His phone buzzed. He turned it back on. Another text from Sarah. I hope you're okay. I know today was hard. Jake typed a response. Deleted it, tried again. Finally just sent, it's complicated. 3 dots appeared. Sarah typing. Then, everything with you is. That stung because it was true. But before he could respond, another notification appeared. An email from the law office. Subject, additional information regarding the Brennan estate. Jake opened it, a short message from George. Jake, I think we need to talk. Not on the phone, come by my house tonight. 7 o'clock. There are things you need to know before you go any further. And yes, this is about what you found. The address is below. The email ended with a street address on the north side of Missoula. Nothing else, no explanation, just an invitation that felt more like a summons. Jake looked back at the ranch house, the mountains beyond, the land Bill had worked his entire life. Everything looked the same as it always had, solid, permanent, real. But underneath was a secret that changed everything. A wife nobody knew about, a daughter given away, and somehow, impossibly, it all connected to Jake. He got in the car, started the engine, but he didn't drive anywhere. Just sat there as the sun moved across the sky and the shadows grew longer, thinking about Bill, about Ruth, about a baby named Margaret who would be 68 years old now, if she was still alive, if she knew who her father was, if she'd spent her whole life wondering why he gave her away. The wind picked up, pushed clouds across the sky. The weather in Montana changed fast, could be sunny one minute and snowing the next. Bill had taught him to read the signs, taught him that nothing stayed the same forever. That change was the only constant, and a man's job was to adapt or get left behind. Jake had been left behind by his job, his wife, his family, his own sense of purpose. But maybe Bill was offering him a way back, not to who he was, but to who he could be, if he was brave enough to face whatever truth was waiting. He pulled out of the driveway, headed toward Missoula. The sun was setting behind him, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple that didn't look real. Montana sunsets were like that, too beautiful to believe. Bill used to say they were God showing off, making sure nobody forgot who was in charge. George's house was a modest ranch style in a quiet neighborhood. Lights on in the windows, a truck in the driveway that was probably older than Jake. He knocked on the door at 7 sharp. George answered immediately, like he'd been waiting right there. "Come in, son. Coffee's on." The inside of the house was neat, lived in but organized. Photos on the walls, books on shelves. The kind of place a man built over decades of careful living. George led Jake to the kitchen. Poured 2 cups of coffee. They sat at a small table by the window. "You found it," George said, not a question. "The safe, yeah, Bill and Ruth. A daughter named Margaret." Jake wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. The heat felt good. "You knew." "I knew. Not everything, but enough." "How long?" "Since the beginning. I met Bill in Korea. We served together. I was there when he married Ruth. I was there when she died." George's eyes went distant, remembering. "That was the worst thing I've ever seen a man go through. Bill loved her, really loved her. Not the way you love someone because it's convenient or expected, but the kind of love that changes who you are." "Then why did he give up Margaret?" "Because it was 1956 and he was a single Marine with no money and a baby who was half Korean. He came back to Montana thinking he could make it work. But his family." George shook his head. "They weren't bad people, just people of their time. They told him nobody would accept a mixed-race child, that he was being selfish, that the baby deserved a proper family. The Sullivans, friends of Ruth's, good people. They'd offered to take Margaret when Ruth died, just until Bill got on his feet. But when he came home and saw how people reacted to even the idea of his Korean daughter, he made the hardest choice of his life." George met Jake's eyes. He let them keep her, signed the papers, gave her a chance at a normal life, and spent 60 years hiding it. Not hiding, protecting. George stood, walked to a cabinet, pulled out a box, set it on the table. Bill never forgot her, never stopped caring. Every month for 59 years, he sent money to the Sullivans, for Margaret's care, for her education, for her future. When she grew up, he kept sending it, through the Sullivans, anonymous. She never knew where it came from. George opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Bill at a post office box in Missoula, all from James and Dorothy Sullivan. Jake picked one up, postmarked 1967. "Dear Bill, Margaret started 3rd grade this month. She's doing wonderfully, top of her class. She asks about her birth parents sometimes. We tell her what we know, that her mother was a brave woman who died too young, that her father loved her enough to want the best for her. She seems to understand. The money you sent helped us buy her a bicycle. She named it Lucky. Thank you for everything you do, Jim and Dorothy." Jake read through more. Margaret's high school graduation, her wedding, the birth of her children. A whole life documented in letters from people who knew the truth but kept the secret. Bill watching his daughter grow up from a distance, never reaching out, never breaking the silence. Until when, Jake asked. 2015. Elizabeth died that year, Bill's wife, your grandmother. For 56 years, he kept the secret from her. Didn't want to hurt her, didn't want her to think she was second choice. When she passed, Bill finally felt free to contact Margaret. He sent her a letter, told her everything. And she wrote back. They corresponded for 3 years. She forgave him, understood why he did what he did. They even met twice, in secret. Nobody else knew. Not your family, not the Sullivan's family, just Bill and Margaret, making up for lost time as best they could. George pulled out another envelope. This is the last letter she sent him, 2 months before he died. Jake opened it. The handwriting was feminine, careful. The letter was 2 pages long, mostly personal, memories shared, gratitude expressed. But the end caught his attention. "Dad, I want you to know I don't regret the life I had. The Sullivans were wonderful parents. I had a good childhood, a good marriage, 3 children who grew into good people, 5 grandchildren who fill my life with joy. You gave me all of that by letting me go. I understand that now, and I'm grateful. But I'm also grateful for these last 3 years, for getting to know you, for understanding where I came from. Thank you for being brave enough to reach out. I love you, Margaret. She called him Dad, Jake said quietly. At the end, yes. Took her a while to get there, but she did. George took the letter back. Bill wanted you to find her, to tell her about the land, about his wishes, about everything he couldn't say because time ran out. What land? George stood again. Went to a filing cabinet, pulled out a manila folder, set it in front of Jake. The 150 acres on the eastern edge of the property. Bill kept it separate from the main ranch, legally separate. He deeded it to a trust in 1990. Margaret is the beneficiary. Jake opened the folder. Legal documents, a trust agreement, a deed, all of it naming Margaret Ruth Sullivan as the rightful owner of 150 acres. Land nobody else in the family knew existed as a separate entity. Why? Because it meant something to Bill. The land. What's on it? George pulled out another paper, a geological survey from 2018. There's natural gas under that land, a lot of it, worth potentially $200 million. The number hung in the air. Jake read the survey, the estimates, the projections, a fortune hidden under Montana soil, and Bill had given it to the daughter he'd abandoned, the daughter nobody knew about. Companies have been sniffing around for 2 years, George continued. Wolf Energy in particular. They approached Bill in 2020, offered to buy the land and the gas rights. Bill refused. They came back with higher offers. He refused every time. They didn't understand why. Nobody did. But Bill knew. He was protecting it for Margaret. Does she know? About the land? Yes. Bill told her a year before he died. About the gas? I don't think so. Bill wanted to protect her from that complication until the time was right. George looked at Jake. That time is now. Wolf Energy isn't going to stop. They're going to pressure Ryan. Make offers he can't refuse. And Ryan doesn't know the land isn't his to sell. Why me? Why not tell Ryan or Margaret directly? Because Bill trusted you to do what's right. Not what's easy, not what's profitable. What's right. George reached across the table, put a hand on Jake's arm. You asked me if I had an idea what was in that safe. I did. Bill told me enough. He said if anything happened to him, if he didn't get to finish what he started, you were the one who'd see it through. He believed in you, Jake, even when you didn't believe in yourself. Outside, night had settled over Missoula. The streetlights cast orange pools on the sidewalk. Somewhere a dog was barking. Normal sounds, normal life. But Jake's world had tilted on its axis. His grandfather wasn't who he thought. His family had secrets that ran deeper than blood, and he'd been chosen to navigate waters he didn't understand. I need to find her, Jake said. Margaret. I have her address in Spokane. I can call her. Tell her you're coming. No, I'll just show up. Some things you can't do over the phone. George nodded. Fair enough, but Jake, there's one more thing you need to know. There's more? About the land, the 150 acres. It's not just valuable because of the gas. George pulled out one final document, a historical survey from the 1940s. During World War II, there was a POW camp near here. Prisoner of war camp, German and Italian soldiers. Some died, disease, accidents. They were buried on what's now that 150 acres. A cemetery nobody remembers. Nobody except Bill. Jake looked at the survey, saw the X marks indicating burial sites, saw the names listed in faded type. Hans Muller, Giuseppe Rossi, dozens more. Men who died far from home, buried in foreign soil, forgotten by everyone except an old Marine who believed every soldier deserved respect, even the enemy. Bill bought the land in '78 specifically to protect those graves. He maintained the cemetery himself, fixed the crosses when they rotted, kept the grass cut, made sure nobody forgot. George's voice was thick with emotion. That's the kind of man he was. And that's what Wolf Energy wants to destroy. They'll dig up those graves, erase that history, turn it into drill sites and access roads. Jake felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about family secrets or hidden fortunes. It was about honor, legacy, keeping promises to the dead. The kind of responsibility you couldn't walk away from without losing a piece of yourself. Bill knew I'd find all this, Jake said. He knew I'd have to choose. Yes, money or honor, easy or right. That's the choice. Jake stood, gathered the papers, the photographs, the letters, everything that proved Bill's secret life, everything that changed what Jake thought he knew about family and duty and the weight of the past. He looked at George, the old lawyer who'd kept Bill's secrets for 60 years, who'd watched his friend live with the burden of impossible choices. "Thank you," Jake said, "for telling me, for trusting me. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. Once you start down this road, there's no turning back. People will get hurt, relationships will break, and you'll have to live with whatever you decide." George walked him to the door. "But I think Bill knew you could handle it. You're stronger than you think, Jake. You just forgot for a while." Jake walked out into the cold Montana night, got in his car, sat there with the engine running and heat slowly filling the cabin. His phone was on the passenger seat. He picked it up, opened his messages. Sarah's last text was still there. "Everything with you is complicated." He typed a response. "It just got a lot more complicated, but maybe that's okay. Maybe complicated is where you find out who you really are." He didn't wait for a response, just put the car in gear and drove. The roads were empty, the stars were out, and somewhere in Spokane, a woman named Margaret was living her life with no idea that her past was about to catch up with her, that the father who gave her away had left her an inheritance that came with impossible choices. Jake drove through the night, toward the ranch, toward whatever came next. The man who'd left Detroit was gone. The man who'd run from everything was done running. In his place was someone he didn't quite recognize yet, but someone he thought Bill would be proud of. Someone who was finally ready to do the hard thing, the right thing, no matter what it cost. The drive to Spokane took 5 hours. Jake left Missoula before dawn, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to that particular shade of blue that only exists in the mountains. The highway cut through valleys where mist hung low over frozen creeks, past towns so small they didn't warrant a stoplight, past ranches where lights glowed in distant windows and men were already working, because cattle didn't care what time the sun came up. Jake had the address memorized, 1523 Maple Street, a residential neighborhood on the north side of Spokane. George had described it: modest homes, older neighborhood, the kind of place where people stayed for decades and knew their neighbors' names. Margaret had lived there for 30 years, raised her children there, buried her husband there, built a quiet life far from the secrets that shaped her beginning. The coffee from a gas station in Superior was burnt and bitter, but Jake drank it anyway. Needed something to cut through the exhaustion. He hadn't slept, had spent the night in the ranch house going through Bill's things, looking for clues, trying to understand the man behind the secret. He'd found more photographs. Ruth and Bill at what looked like a church, Ruth holding a baby. Bill in civilian clothes standing in front of the Sullivan house in Spokane, staring at a window on the second floor. Never going to the door, just watching. The caption on the back read, "Margaret's first birthday, I couldn't stay away." Each photo was a wound, a moment of connection Bill had denied himself, a choice made and lived with for 6 decades. Jake understood sacrifice, had made his own, left Montana to serve his country, left the Corps to build a civilian life, left Sarah because staying felt like lying. But Bill's sacrifice was different, permanent, the kind that hollowed you out from the inside. Spokane appeared on the horizon just after 10 in the morning, a city that sprawled across the high desert plateau. Not beautiful like Missoula, more functional, industrial, the kind of place people moved to for work and stayed because leaving required too much effort. Jake followed the GPS through downtown, past the river, into neighborhoods where the houses got smaller and the yards bigger. Maple Street was lined with maples. Made sense. Their branches were still bare, but you could see where they'd create a canopy in summer. 1523 was a single-story ranch, cream-colored siding, brown trim, a small front porch with a metal glider. The yard was neat but not obsessive, flower beds mulched for winter, a bird feeder hanging from a shepherd's hook, the kind of home that whispered of a life well-lived but not shouted. Jake sat in the rental car for 20 minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel, trying to find the words he'd need. How do you tell someone their father is dead when they only just found him? How do you explain that the past they thought was settled has opened up like a grave? Finally, he got out, walked up the concrete path, stood on the porch, knocked 3 times, waited, heard footsteps inside. The door opened. Margaret Sullivan was 71 years old, small, maybe 5'2", silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore jeans and a University of Washington sweatshirt. Reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. Her face was lined but kind. And her eyes were Bill's eyes. That same gray-green that changed with the light. That same way of looking at you like she could see past whatever you were pretending to be. "Can I help you?" Her voice was soft, a little wary. Strangers didn't usually show up unannounced. "My name is Jake Brennan. I'm Bill Brennan's grandson." The color drained from her face. She grabbed the door frame for support. "Bill's grandson?" "Yes, ma'am. I know this is unexpected. I should have called, but some things need to be said in person." Margaret studied him for a long moment. Jake saw recognition flicker across her features. Maybe he looked like Bill had at his age. Maybe she just saw the family resemblance. Whatever it was, something in her softened. "You'd better come in." The inside of the house smelled like coffee and something baking. Banana bread, maybe. The walls were covered with photographs. Children at various ages. Graduations, weddings, grandchildren. A whole family tree that Bill had never been part of. Margaret led Jake to a small kitchen, gestured to a chair at the table. "I was making bread," she said. "It'll be ready in about 10 minutes. Would you like coffee?" "Please." She poured 2 cups, set them on the table, sat down across from him. Her hands were shaking slightly. She wrapped them around her cup to steady them. "He's gone, isn't he?" she said. "Not a question." 3 weeks ago. "I'm sorry. I would have come sooner, but I only found out about you yesterday." Margaret nodded slowly. "I wondered if anyone would come. Bill said his family didn't know about me, that he'd kept me separate, protected me from the complications." She took a sip of fine. "How did you find out?" Jake told her. About the will reading, the letter, the safe under the barn foundation, the photographs and certificates and adoption papers. The whole hidden history that Bill had left for him to discover. Margaret listened without interrupting. Her eyes got wet, but she didn't cry. Just absorbed it all, like she'd been preparing for this conversation her entire life. "He left you the truth," she said when Jake finished. "That was always his way. Never forced anything. Just created the conditions and let people find their own path." "You weren't angry when he first contacted you in 2015? Angry?" Margaret considered the question. "No, I forgave him the moment I finished reading his first letter. How could I not? He was 26 years old, a widow with a baby in 1956. Can you imagine? The pressure he must have been under. The impossible choices." She paused, her eyes distant. But forgiveness and rebuilding a relationship are different things. Forgiveness was immediate. Trust took time. Understanding took time. She stood, walked to a cabinet, pulled out a box. "He sent me these, over 3 years. We wrote back and forth, slowly learning each other." The box was full of letters. Jake recognized Bill's handwriting. Dozens of letters. Margaret pulled one out, unfolded it carefully. This was the first one, February 10th, 2015. She handed it to Jake. He read, "Dear Margaret, I don't know if you'll read this. Don't know if you'll forgive what I'm about to confess, but I'm 86 years old and time is running out for honesty. I am your father. I gave you away when you were 9 months old. Not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you too much to subject you to a life of judgment and prejudice. Your mother was the most beautiful person I've ever known, inside and out. When she died, I died too. Or part of me did. The part that knew how to be brave. I've spent 60 years trying to protect you from a distance, sending money through your parents, keeping track of your life through their letters, watching you become someone extraordinary without ever getting to tell you how proud I am. I don't expect forgiveness, don't deserve it, but I needed you to know the truth, that not a day has passed that I didn't think of you, that every good thing I ever did was my way of honoring your mother and hoping you'd have the life you deserved. I'm sorry, Margaret, for everything, your father, Bill." Jake folded the letter carefully, handed it back. Margaret put it in the box with the others. "I wrote back the same day, told him I understood, that the Sullivans were wonderful parents, that I'd had a good life, that I forgave him." The timer on the oven beeped. Margaret pulled out the banana bread, set it on the counter to cool. "We met twice, once in Seattle, once here. He drove over. We sat in this kitchen and talked for hours. About Mom, about his life, about mine. It was like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. He never told anyone in the family. I asked him not to. Didn't want to disrupt lives, didn't want people feeling obligated to accept me. I had my family. He had his. We just needed a little space for each other. That was enough. Jake pulled out the folder George had given him. The trust documents. The deed. It wasn't enough for Bill. He left you something. 150 acres on the eastern edge of the ranch. It's been in a trust with your name on it since 1990. Margaret took the papers. Read them slowly. Her hands started shaking again. This can't be right. 150 acres? That's worth more than you think. There's natural gas under the land, potentially worth $200 million. The papers slipped from Margaret's fingers, scattered across the table. She stared at Jake like he'd spoken a foreign language. 200 million. That's the estimate, but there's more. Jake explained about the POW cemetery, the graves Bill had protected, the companies trying to buy the land, Wolf Energy and their pressure, the fact that Bill had refused every offer because he was protecting both Margaret's inheritance and the memory of soldiers who died far from home. Margaret stood, walked to the window, looked out at her small yard, the bird feeder swaying in the breeze, a life built on modest means and careful choices. I don't need that kind of money. I have enough. My pension, Social Security, the house is paid off. This isn't about need. It's about what Bill wanted you to have, what he thought you deserved. What I deserve is what I already got. A good childhood, good parents, a husband who loved me, 3 beautiful children. She turned back to Jake. Those soldiers Bill protected, they deserve more than I do. They're the ones who should be honored, not forgotten so someone can extract gas from the ground. That's what Bill thought too. That's why he never sold. But now he's gone and the pressure's going to increase. My cousin Ryan thinks he owns that land, doesn't know it's separate. If Wolf Energy makes the right offer, he might sell without knowing he doesn't have the right. Margaret sat back down, picked up the trust documents, read them again more carefully. What are you asking me to do? Come back with me. To Montana. Meet the family. Make your claim clear before someone makes a mistake that can't be undone. Your family doesn't know I exist. They need to, and you need to see the land, understand what Bill was protecting, then you can decide what to do with it. Margaret was quiet for a long time. The coffee in her cup had gone cold. Outside, a neighbor was mowing their lawn even though it was barely March. The sound of the mower was steady, rhythmic, normal. Everything Margaret's life had been until 3 minutes ago when a stranger showed up and told her she was worth $200 million. I have a granddaughter, Margaret said finally. Claire, she's 28, just finished her master's in environmental science at the University of Montana, specializes in sustainable land management. Missoula? Yes, she's been there for 3 years. Never knew she was living an hour away from her great-grandfather. Margaret smiled sadly. Life's full of these strange coincidences. Or maybe they're not coincidences. Maybe Bill knew somehow, kept an eye on her the way he kept an eye on me. Does she know about Bill? No, I haven't told her yet. Haven't told anyone. It felt too private, too complicated. Margaret stood again, this time with purpose. But if I'm going to Montana, she should come. She understands land better than anyone I know, and she has a right to know where she comes from. Jake felt something loosen in his chest, relief maybe, or hope. When can you be ready? I'll need to make some calls, arrange things. Tomorrow? I can drive over tomorrow. I'll meet you at the ranch. Give me your number. I'll text you the address. They exchanged information. Margaret walked Jake to the door, stopped him with a hand on his arm. Why did he choose you? To find all this? To tell me? Jake thought about that. About Bill's letter saying he was the only one who could be trusted to do what's right. About George saying Bill believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. About all the summers he'd spent on that ranch learning how to be a man from someone who'd made mistakes but never stopped trying to fix them. I think because I'm broken, Jake said, and broken people understand that some things can't be fixed, only honored. Margaret's eyes went bright with tears. He was broken too, from the moment Mom died, but he never let it make him cruel. That takes a special kind of strength. Yes, ma'am, it does. Jake drove back to Montana in a daze. The landscape looked different somehow. Like knowing the truth about Bill had changed the way light hit the mountains. He called Claire from a rest stop outside of Coeur d'Alene. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was young, energetic. The kind of voice that hadn't been worn down by disappointment yet. This is Claire. Claire Sullivan? This is Jake Brennan. Your grandmother Margaret gave me your number. A pause. Is Grandma okay? She's fine. Better than fine. But there's something you need to know. Something about your family. About where you come from. Jake took a breath, dove in. Your grandmother's biological father was my grandfather, Bill Brennan. He died 3 weeks ago. He left some things for your grandmother. Important thing. She's driving to Montana tomorrow to handle it. She asked me to call you, thought you might want to be there. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm sorry. My grandmother's biological father? Grandma was adopted, we know that. But she never knew who her birth parents were. She does now. And there's land involved, 150 acres. Your grandmother inherited it, but it's complicated. There's a cemetery on the land, and gas rights, and companies trying to buy it. Jake realized he was talking too fast, slowed down. Look, I know this is a lot, but can you meet us at the ranch tomorrow? Your grandmother will explain everything. The Brennan Ranch? I know it. I've driven past it doing field research. Claire sounded stunned, overwhelmed. My great-grandfather owned that land? Part of it. The part that matters most. I'll be there. What time? Noon? I'll be there at 11. Jake hung up, leaned against the rental car. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few semis and a couple with a screaming toddler loading into a minivan. Regular people living regular lives while Jake's world kept expanding in directions he couldn't predict. His phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. Where are you? We need to talk. Jake called him. Ryan answered immediately. Where the hell have you been? Spokane. I'll explain when I get back. Spokane? What's in Spokane? Family. Listen, Ryan, there's some things about the ranch you don't know. About land Bill kept separate. About decisions that need to be made. Jake, I don't have time for cryptic. Wolf Energy's lawyer called this morning. They want to meet. Tomorrow at 2. They're prepared to make an offer for the eastern acreage. Jake's stomach dropped. The 150 acres? How did you know? Because that's the land I need to talk to you about. The land you don't own. Silence, then, what are you talking about? Bill put it in a trust 25 years ago. It belongs to someone else. You can't sell what isn't yours. That's impossible. The estate inventory listed all 800 acres under my name. The inventory was wrong or incomplete. I have the documents, legal documents, from George Coleman. More silence. Jake could hear Ryan breathing hard, trying to control his temper. Get back here. Now, we need to sort this out before I meet with Wolf. I'm 3 hours away. I'll be there by dinner. You better have a damn good explanation. The call ended. Jake got back in the car, started driving. The sun was past its peak. Shadows stretched across the highway. In his mind, he kept seeing Margaret's face when he told her about the money. The way she'd looked at her modest house and simple life and said she had enough. Like $200 million was an inconvenience rather than a blessing. Bill had chosen his daughter well. Or maybe he hadn't chosen. Maybe she'd become who she was despite him. Either way, she was going to be the key to whatever came next. Jake reached the ranch just after 5. Ryan's truck was in the driveway along with 2 others Jake didn't recognize. He found Ryan in the kitchen with 2 men in suits. One was maybe 50, silver hair, expensive watch. The other was younger, 35, sharp eyes, lawyer written all over him. Jake, Ryan said. His voice was cold. This is Preston Wolf and his attorney, David Chen. They were just explaining their offer. Preston stood, extended his hand. His grip was firm, confident. Mr. Brennan, I've heard a lot about you. All of it recent, I guess. Preston smiled. Fair enough. I'll get straight to it. Wolf Energy wants to develop the eastern parcel of this ranch. We're prepared to offer $12 million for the land and mineral rights. $6 million to your family. $6 million to whoever this trust beneficiary is. Everyone wins. Everyone except the soldiers buried there. Preston's smile didn't waver. I'm aware of the cemetery. We'll handle the relocation respectfully. Every soldier will be identified if possible. Proper military honors. Reburial at a national cemetery. This isn't about disrespecting the dead. It's about practical land use. Jake pulled out his folder, set it on the table. The beneficiary is Margaret Sullivan. She's Bill Brennan's daughter from his first marriage. A marriage nobody in this family knew about. She owns the land outright. and she's not interested in selling. Preston picked up the trust documents. Read them carefully. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, maybe, or concern. This is legitimate? Verified by George Coleman. He's been Bill's lawyer for 40 years. David Chen, the younger lawyer, leaned forward. A secret daughter, a hidden trust. This sounds like the setup for a legal challenge. Are you sure these documents will hold up? George says they will, and I trust George. Preston set the papers down. Then I'd like to meet this Margaret Sullivan. Discuss the situation directly. She'll be here tomorrow. Perfect. We'll postpone our meeting until then. Preston stood, buttoned his jacket. Mr. Brennan, I want you to understand something. I'm not the villain here. Montana is dying. Young people are leaving. Towns are becoming ghost towns. This development could bring jobs, revenue, a future for communities that don't have one. The natural gas under that land could power thousands of homes, heat schools, keep hospitals running. At the cost of erasing history. History is already erased. How many people even know there's a cemetery there? How many visit? How many care? Preston's voice was calm, reasonable. I'm offering to honor those men better than they're being honored now. Stone monuments, plaques, proper recognition. And in exchange, we create something that benefits the living. Bill didn't think it was a fair trade. Bill was a good man, but he was also a man who lived in the past. Sometimes the past needs to make room for the future. Preston and his lawyer left. Ryan waited until he heard their car pull away. Then he turned to Jake. You want to explain what the hell is going on? Jake told him everything. About Ruth, about Margaret, about the 60-year secret and the daughter given away, and the promise Bill had kept from beyond the grave. Ryan listened. His face went through a dozen expressions. Shock, anger, confusion, finally landing on something that looked like exhaustion. So I don't own the land I thought I owned. The land I was counting on to save this ranch. You own 650 acres. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Ryan sat down heavily. I'm $3.2 million in debt, Jake. I expanded too fast. Bought equipment I couldn't afford. The market crashed and I'm underwater. That $12 million from Wolf would have cleared my debts and left enough to modernize. Now you're telling me I can't sell because some woman I've never met owns the most valuable piece of property on the ranch. She's family. She's a stranger. So was I. 3 days ago, you could barely stand to look at me. Now we're talking. Now we're trying to figure this out together. Jake pulled up a chair, sat across from Ryan. Bill put us in this position for a reason. He could have told you about Margaret, could have made this simple, but he didn't. He made it complicated because complicated forces people to talk, to think, to do better than the easy thing. Ryan rubbed his face. I've got a meeting with the bank next week. They're threatening foreclosure if I don't make a payment, a big payment. How big? $500,000. Jake felt the weight of that number. $500,000 in a week. The kind of pressure that made men do things they'd regret. What if there's another way? What if Margaret agrees to some kind of deal that helps you without selling the land? Like what? I don't know yet, but she's coming tomorrow. So is her granddaughter, Claire. She studies sustainable land management. Maybe between all of us, we can find an answer that works. Ryan didn't look convinced, but he nodded. I'll give it a day. But Jake, if we can't figure something out, I'm going to have to make hard choices. I've got a family, a son. This ranch is his inheritance. I can't let it all disappear because Bill had a secret. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. Again. He walked out to the eastern pasture, followed a dirt track until he found the cemetery. It wasn't much to look at, a clearing and a stand of pines, maybe 30 wooden crosses, weathered gray by decades of sun and snow. Some had names carved into them. Most were just marked with numbers. The grass was overgrown, but not completely wild. Someone had been maintaining this. Bill, probably. Keeping his promise to men who died in a war that ended before Jake's father was born. Jake walked among the graves, read the names he could make out. Hans Muller, Giuseppe Rossi, a Japanese name he couldn't pronounce. Enemy soldiers, or that's what they'd been called. But standing here in the quiet dark, they didn't feel like enemies. They felt like boys who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, who'd died of disease or accident or bad luck, who'd been buried and forgotten by everyone except one old Marine who understood that a soldier was a soldier, regardless of which flag he fought under. I don't know what to do, Jake said to the silence, to the crosses, to Bill's ghost if it was listening. Tell me what to do. No answer came, just wind in the pines and the distant sound of cattle. Jake stood there until the cold drove him back to the house, lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Ryan's desperation and Margaret's inheritance, and Preston Wolf's reasonable voice explaining why history needed to step aside for progress. Morning came gray and cold. Jake was in the kitchen drinking coffee when he heard a car pull up, then another. He looked out the window, saw Margaret getting out of a sensible sedan, saw a younger woman with dark hair climbing out of a Subaru wagon. Claire. They stood in the driveway talking for a moment. Then Margaret hugged her granddaughter, a long embrace that spoke of explanations given and accepted. Jake met them at the door. Margaret looked tired but determined. Claire looked curious, excited even. She had Margaret's eyes, and behind Margaret's eyes, Bill's eyes, the chain of genetics stretching back through time. This is Claire, Margaret said. My granddaughter, your cousin, I suppose. Second cousin, Claire said. She had a firm handshake, direct gaze. This is insane in the best possible way. Ryan came out from the barn, stopped when he saw Margaret. The resemblance to Bill must have hit him because his expression shifted, softened. He walked over slowly. You look like him, he said. I'm told I have his eyes. You do? Ryan glanced at Jake, then back to Margaret. I'm Ryan. This is my ranch. Or most of it, anyway. I understand this is complicated. I don't want to make things harder. Too late for that. But come inside. We should talk. They gathered around the kitchen table, the same table where Bill had carved his life into the wood grain. Margaret told her story. Ryan listened, asked questions. His anger from the night before had transformed into something else. Resignation, maybe, or acceptance. When Margaret finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, he said, finally, for what Bill went through, for what you went through. Nobody should have to grow up not knowing their father. I had good parents, a good life. But still, it's not right. Family's supposed to stick together. Sometimes sticking together means letting go. Bill understood that. Margaret pulled out the trust documents. These say I own 150 acres. I'd like to see them. I'll take you, Claire said. I've been studying land in this region for 3 years. I know exactly where that parcel is. They drove out in Claire's Subaru. Jake and Ryan followed in Ryan's truck. The road turned to dirt, then to 2 rough tracks through grass. Finally, they parked and walked, through the pines, past a creek running clear and cold, into the clearing where the crosses stood. Margaret stopped at the edge, put her hand over her mouth. Claire walked among the graves reading names, running her hands over the weathered wood. When she came back, her eyes were bright. This is extraordinary, she said. Do you know what this is? A piece of history nobody remembers. These soldiers have been here for 80 years, forgotten by everyone, but not by him, not by Bill. Preston Wolf wants to move them, Jake said. Rebury them at a national cemetery. Use this land for gas extraction. Claire's expression hardened. That would be a mistake. Moving graves is traumatic, disrespectful. And for what? Money? $200 million, Ryan said quietly. Money that could save my ranch. Send my son to college. Give my family a future. There are other ways, Claire said. Ways to extract the gas without disturbing the graves. Horizontal drilling. You drill from outside the cemetery, access the gas laterally. It costs more, takes longer, but it's possible. How much more? 30 to 40% more than conventional methods. Ryan did the math in his head. So instead of 200 million, maybe 120, something like that. And it would take years to develop, not months. You'd need environmental studies, permits, the right partners. Claire pulled out her phone, started taking photos of the cemetery. But this is exactly my field. Sustainable resource extraction. I could develop a proposal, find companies willing to do it right. In time to save my ranch? I've got a week before the bank forecloses. The hope that had started to build deflated. They stood among the graves in silence. The wind moved through the pines. Somewhere a crow called. The sound echoed across the valley. Margaret spoke. How much do you need? $500,000 by next Friday. I have that in savings from my pension and my husband's life insurance. I can give it to you. Ryan stared at her. You don't even know me. You're family. And you're trying to protect something Bill built. That's enough. Margaret looked at the graves, at the crosses marking forgotten men. This place matters, not because of the money or the money, because Bill thought it was worth protecting. If $500,000 buys us time to figure out how to do this right, it's worth it. Ryan's face did something complicated. Gratitude and shame and relief all mixed together. I'll pay you back. I know you will. With interest if you want. But right now, let's focus on keeping this land and the family and those soldiers at peace. They walked back to the trucks, made plans. Claire would start researching drilling companies and environmental requirements. Margaret would transfer the money to Ryan's account. Jake would handle the legal side with George. And Ryan would tell Preston Wolf that the land wasn't for sale. Not now. Maybe not ever. As they drove back to the ranch house, Jake's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Brennan, this is Preston Wolf. I understand Margaret Sullivan has arrived. I'd like to meet with all of you this evening if possible. I have information about the land that might change your perspective. 6 p.m. at the ranch. I'll bring dinner. Jake showed the text to Ryan. He's not giving up. Did you expect him to? $200 million is a lot of motivation. Should we meet with him? Ryan thought about it. Yeah, might as well hear what he has to say. Know what we're up against. At 6 p.m. precisely, 2 SUVs pulled up. Preston got out with his lawyer, also with bags of food from what looked like an expensive restaurant. He smiled when he saw them all gathered on the porch. I brought Italian. Hope that's all right. They ate at the dining room table. Preston was charming, asked Margaret about her life, congratulated Claire on her research, told stories about Montana and the challenges facing rural communities. He didn't mention the land until after dessert. Then he pulled out a folder. I want to show you something, he said. He spread out documents, financial projections, maps, engineering reports. This is what Wolf Energy has planned, not just gas extraction, community development. We'd build a processing facility that employs 200 people, partner with local schools for training programs, create a foundation that funds scholarships and infrastructure projects. He showed them renderings, a modern facility that looked more like a tech campus than an industrial site, numbers showing economic impact, tax revenue, jobs created, families supported. The cemetery would be relocated with full honors, Preston continued. We'd work with the German and Italian governments to notify families. Create a memorial here on site, bigger and better maintained than what exists now. Those soldiers would finally get the recognition they deserve. While you extract billions of dollars from under them, Jake said, while we create opportunity from resources that are otherwise just sitting there, unused, wasted. Preston looked at each of them in turn. I understand the emotional attachment, I do, but emotion doesn't pay bills, doesn't create jobs, doesn't give young people a reason to stay in Montana instead of leaving for Seattle or Denver. He pushed a new document across the table. $15 million. Split however you want, plus 10% of all revenue for the next 20 years. That could be another 30 to 50 million over time. Think about what you could do with that money. Margaret, you could set up your grandchildren for life. Ryan, you could modernize this ranch, make it profitable again. Jake, you could start over, build something new. The numbers sat there like a weight. Jake could see Ryan doing the math, could see the hunger in his eyes. 15 million plus a percentage, enough to solve every problem and create new possibilities. But Margaret was shaking her head. It's not about the money. Then what is it about? Keeping a promise. Margaret stood. Bill protected that cemetery for 46 years, did it quietly, without recognition or profit, just because it was the right thing to do. I'm not going to undo that the minute he's gone. Preston stood too. Mrs. Sullivan, I respect your loyalty, but Bill made his choice based on the world as it was. The world has changed. We have technology now that can do more good for more people. We can honor the past and build the future. They're not mutually exclusive. They are when the future requires erasing the past. Preston looked at Ryan. What about you? This is your livelihood, your family's future. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Jake could see the war happening behind his eyes. Need versus principle. Survival versus honor. Finally, he spoke. I appreciate the offer, but the land isn't mine to sell. It's Margaret's. If she says no, then it's no. Preston's professional smile slipped just slightly. I see. Well, the offer stands. If you change your mind, you know how to reach me. He gathered his papers, nodded to his lawyer. Thank you for your time and for dinner. They left. The room felt smaller after they were gone, quieter. Margaret sat back down. Did I just make a terrible mistake? No, Claire said. You made the right choice. The hard choice. That's different. Ryan? Margaret looked at him. I just cost you $15 million. You gave me $500,000 to save my ranch. I think we're even. Ryan managed a tired smile. Besides, Preston's wrong. Some things aren't for sale. I'm just sorry it took me this long to remember that. Jake's phone buzzed again. Another text, this one from George. Preston Wolf just called me, asking about legal challenges to the trust. Wanted to know if there were any weaknesses. I told him there weren't, but he's going to push. Be ready. Jake showed the text to the others. He's not done. Let him push, Margaret said. Bill's lawyer says the trust is solid. We'll deal with whatever comes. But Jake felt uneasy. Preston had been too calm when he left, too accepting. Men didn't walk away from $200 million without a fight. They just changed tactics, found another angle. And Jake had a feeling that whatever came next would make tonight's dinner conversation look gentle. Outside, night was falling. The mountains were dark shapes against a darkening sky. Somewhere in that darkness was a cemetery full of forgotten soldiers. And somewhere in the house was a family that hadn't existed 3 days ago, learning to trust each other, learning to stand together. Bill had set this all in motion, had created the conditions and let people find their own path. And somehow, impossibly, they were finding it, one hard choice at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, sitting around the table where Bill had spent 70 years, they were family. Complicated, unexpected, but family nonetheless. And maybe that was the real inheritance. Not land or money, but the chance to become something better than you were. To honor the past while building the future. To keep promises even when it cost you everything. Jake looked at Margaret, at Claire, at Ryan, at this strange gathering of people connected by blood and secrets, and the choices of a man who died trying to make things right. To Bill, he said, raising his water glass. To Bill, they echoed. And somewhere, Jake thought, the old man was smiling. The call came at 2 in the morning. Jake was already awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of the last 3 days. When his phone lit up, he answered without checking the number. Mr. Brennan, this is Sheriff Tom Davidson. I'm at the eastern pasture of your ranch. You need to get out here, now. Jake was dressed and in his truck within 2 minutes. The drive through the dark felt longer than it should have. His headlights cutting tunnels through blackness, his mind racing through possibilities. None of them good. When he crested the hill above the cemetery, he saw lights, red and blue flashers from 2 sheriffs' vehicles, work lights illuminating the clearing. And people, too many people. He parked and walked toward the lights. Sheriff Davison met him halfway. 60 years old, gray mustache, the kind of weathered face that came from 30 years of dealing with Montana's worst. But tonight he looked troubled. What happened? Someone tried to dig up the graves, got 3 of them partially excavated before a neighbor saw the lights and called it in. Davidson gestured toward the cemetery. By the time we got here, they were gone. Left their equipment. We're running the serial numbers now. Jake walked to the edge of the clearing, saw the damage. 3 graves torn open, crosses knocked over, dirt piled in careless heaps. It looked like violence, like desecration. His hands curled into fists. Who would do this? That's what we're trying to figure out. But Jake, there's something you should know. The equipment, the excavator they left behind, it's registered to a shell company. We traced it back. The company's owned by Wolf Energy. The words hit like a physical blow. Preston Wolf did this? I'm not saying that. I'm saying the equipment belongs to one of his subsidiaries. Could be stolen. Could be someone trying to frame him. Could be he contracted work and didn't ask enough questions. We won't know until we investigate. But you have enough to question him. We will. First thing in the morning. But Jake, this is going to get complicated. Wolf's got lawyers, political connections, money. If we go after him, we need everything airtight. Ryan's truck pulled up. He climbed out looking like he'd dressed in the dark, which he probably had. Behind him came Margaret's sedan and Claire's Subaru. They'd all gotten the same call. They stood at the edge of the cemetery looking at the destruction. Margaret's hand went to her mouth. Claire looked like she might be sick. Those bastards, Ryan said. His voice was quiet, but Jake heard the rage underneath. We don't know it was Wolf, Jake said. Who else? He made an offer. We said no. Now suddenly someone's digging up graves with his equipment? Come on, Jake, connect the dots. Davidson held up his hands. Everyone calm down. We're handling this. I need statements from all of you. Then I need you to go home. Let us do our jobs. They gave their statements, separately, one at a time. While they waited, Jake walked among the damaged graves. Read the names again. Hans Muller, his cross was snapped in half. Giuseppe Rossi, his grave was the deepest excavation. The third was unmarked, just a number. Prisoner 4782, no name, no country, just a number that represented a life ended far from home. Claire came to stand beside him. She had her phone out, taking photos, documenting everything with the methodical precision of a scientist. This is deliberate, and she said. They were looking for something. Like what? I don't know. But look at the pattern. They didn't just dig randomly. They targeted specific graves, the three closest to where the main gas deposit would be. Like they were testing something, or trying to prove the graves weren't real. That's insane. Is it? If Wolf could prove the cemetery is fake, that Bill made it up to protect the land, then Margaret's claim gets weaker. The trust could be challenged. The whole thing falls apart. Jake looked at the open graves, at the bones partially visible in the disturbed earth. Real bones. Real men who died 80 years ago. These are real. We know that, but will it hold up in court? Will there be enough documentation? Death certificates, burial records, anything that proves these men are who Bill said they were. The question hung there. Jake didn't have an answer. Bill had maintained the cemetery, but had he kept records? Had there ever been official documentation? Or was this just an old man's word about graves that everyone else had forgotten? Davidson approached. We're done here. I'll have deputies patrol the area tonight. Make sure nobody comes back. But Mr. Brennan, I'd suggest you get a lawyer, a good one. This situation is about to get legal in a hurry. They drove back to the ranch in silence. Dawn was breaking, gray light seeping into the sky. They gathered in the kitchen again. The same table, the same chairs, but everything felt different now. Heavier, more fragile. We need George, Jake said. He'll know what to do. It's 5 a.m, Ryan pointed out. He'll understand. Jake called. George answered on the second ring. Sounded wide awake. I heard. Sheriff Davidson called me 20 minutes ago. Professional courtesy. He wanted me to know before it hit the news. The news? Jake, someone desecrated a war cemetery on private land with equipment tied to a major corporation. This is going to be front page by noon. Every media outlet in Montana will be calling. You need to be ready. Ready for what? For Wolf to spin this, to claim it wasn't him, to make you look like you're using dead soldiers to block development, to turn public opinion against you. George paused. And if I know Preston Wolf, he's already 3 moves ahead. This wasn't vandalism. It was strategy. Jake felt cold. What do we do? First, we secure the cemetery, get it documented properly. I'll call the State Historical Society, see if we can get it registered as a protected site. That'll make it harder to disturb. Second, we verify every grave. I'll reach out to military archives, see what records exist from the POW camps. Third, we prepare for a legal battle. Because Wolf isn't going away, he's just getting started. The kitchen door opened. A man Jake didn't recognize walked in. Late 70s. Military bearing despite his age. He wore a jacket with patches, veterans organizations, campaign ribbons. He looked at them each in turn before speaking. My name is Frank Torres. I'm a friend of Bill's. Was a friend. We served together in Korea. His voice carried the gravel of age, but the strength of conviction. Sheriff Davidson called me, told me what happened. I came as soon as I could. Margaret stood. You knew my father? I did. Better than most. We were in the same unit. Went through hell together. When he came back to Montana, we stayed in touch. Not often, but enough. Frank pulled out a chair, sat down heavily. Bill talked about you toward the end. After Elizabeth died, he was torn up about giving you away. Said it was the biggest mistake of his life. He told me that too, Margaret said softly. But he also told me about this place, the cemetery, why it mattered to him. Frank reached into his jacket, pulled out a worn leather journal. Bill kept records of every soldier buried here, every name he could find, every detail. He gave me a copy 20 years ago, said if anything happened to him, someone needed to know the truth. He opened the journal. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, names, dates, causes of death. Prisoner numbers matched to identities. documentation that transformed anonymous graves into real people with real histories. Claire took the journal carefully, started reading. Her eyes went wide. This is incredible. This is everything we need. Birth dates, hometowns, unit assignments. How did he get all this? Military archives, letters to foreign governments, decades of research. Bill didn't just maintain those graves. He gave those men back their names. Frank looked at Jake. He knew someone would try to take this land eventually. He prepared for it, made sure there was proof, made sure those soldiers couldn't be erased. Ryan leaned forward. Why didn't he tell us? Why keep it secret? Because he didn't trust everyone to do the right thing. No offense. But Bill learned early that blood doesn't guarantee honor. He chose who he trusted carefully. And apparently, he chose Jake. The weight of that settled over the table. Bill's trust, Bill's faith, Bill's belief that Jake would stand up when it mattered. Jake felt it like a hand on his shoulder. A voice saying, "Don't let me down, son." George's voice came through the phone speaker. "Frank Torres, good to hear from you. Is that journal authenticated?" "Every page. Bill had me witness his entries. Sign them. Date them. This will hold up in any court. Then we've got our defense. I'll start the paperwork to register the cemetery. Frank, I'll need that journal. We'll make eyes, but the original needs to be secured. Already planned on it." The conversation turned technical. Legal strategies, documentation requirements, historical preservation protocols. Jake listened, but his mind was elsewhere. On Preston Wolf, on the calculation behind the grave desecration, on the fact that this was only the beginning. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Brennan, Preston Wolf here. I just heard about the incident at the cemetery. I want you to know Wolf Energy had nothing to do with it. Our equipment was reported stolen last week. We filed a police report. I'm happy to provide documentation. I hope we can resolve this misunderstanding. The offer still stands." Jake showed the text to the others. Ryan snorted. "Convenient. Equipment stolen last week, right around when we turned him down." "He's covering his tracks," Claire said, "making sure there's plausible deniability." Margaret took Jake's phone, read the text. "He's good. I'll give him that. But he's not as smart as Bill." At 8 a.m., Jake's phone started ringing. Media requests, local news, then regional. By noon, national outlets were calling. The story had gotten out. War cemetery desecrated. Billion-dollar energy company implicated. Small family ranch fighting corporate greed. It was the kind of narrative that sold papers and generated clicks. George called back. "Don't talk to anyone, not yet. We need to control the message. I'm setting up a press conference for tomorrow. We'll present the journal, announce the historical registration, frame this as Bill's legacy worth protecting. And if Wolf holds his own press conference, let him. We have the truth. We have documentation. We have the moral high ground. Unless he's got something we don't know about, he's fighting uphill." But Preston Wolf did have something. It came at 4 p.m. A courier delivered an envelope to the ranch. Legal papers, a lawsuit, Wolf Energy versus the estate of William Brennan and Margaret Sullivan. The claims were technical, but the thrust was clear. The trust was invalid. Bill hadn't been mentally competent when he created it. The cemetery wasn't officially recognized. The graves couldn't be verified. The land belonged to the main estate, and Ryan had the right to sell it. George arrived within the hour, read through the lawsuit carefully. His face gave nothing away until he finished. Then he set the papers down and removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. This is comprehensive. Wolf's lawyers did their homework. They're not trying to win on facts. They're trying to bury us in procedure, drag this out until you can't afford to keep fighting. "Can we win?" Jake asked. "In court?" "Eventually, but eventually might be 2 years from now. And it'll cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Unless." "Unless what?" "Unless we can prove Wolf was behind the grave desecration. Then this becomes a criminal matter, tampering with burial sites, destruction of historical property. If we can tie him to it directly, the lawsuit becomes leverage against him instead of the other way around." Ryan stood, started pacing. "So we're stuck. We can't sell the land because Margaret owns it, but we can't develop it because Wolf's suing us. And we can't prove Wolf did anything wrong because he covered his tracks." "Not necessarily," Claire said. She'd been quiet, studying something on her laptop. "I've been looking at the equipment registration. The excavator they left behind. It was reported stolen last week. But the GPS tracker wasn't disabled until the night of the desecration. Everyone turned to look at her. She turned her laptop around, showed them a tracking map, a line showing the excavator's movement, from a Wolf Energy storage yard to the cemetery, with stops in between, timestamps and locations all documented. "How did you get this?" George asked. "The equipment has built-in GPS for fleet management. Most companies don't even know you can access it with the right software. But I've been working with construction companies on environmental monitoring. I know the systems." Claire zoomed in on the map. "Look at the second to last stop, 1700 Birch Lane. Know what's there?" Jake pulled out his phone, searched the address. Preston Wolf's house. The excavator sat in his driveway for 43 minutes the afternoon before the desecration. Then it went directly to the cemetery. Frank leaned forward. "Can this be verified? Will it hold up?" "The data's on the company's own servers. They'd have to admit they either ordered the desecration or have terrible security. Either way, it ties back to them." George stood. "I need to make some calls. If we can document this properly, we have grounds for criminal charges. And that changes everything." He left the kitchen. They could hear his voice in the next room. Professional, precise. The sound of a man who'd spent 40 years turning evidence into justice. Jake looked at Claire, at this young woman who'd been a stranger 4 days ago and was now possibly saving everything. "Thank you," he said. "Thank me when it works. Right now, we're just gathering ammunition. The fight hasn't started yet." But Claire was wrong. The fight had started. They just didn't know how big it was going to get. Meanwhile, 50 miles away in Billings, Preston Wolf sat alone in his office. It was past midnight. He hadn't slept in 2 days. On his desk sat photos from the cemetery, the excavated graves, the broken crosses, the desecration his contractor had caused. He'd ordered a survey, just a survey, verify the graves were real, document their locations. Nothing invasive, nothing destructive. But Derek Mullins had misunderstood. Or maybe he'd understood perfectly and decided to take initiative. Either way, the result was the same. A war cemetery violated, soldiers dishonored, everything Preston had built at risk. He thought about his father, Carlos Torres, Marine Corps, Korea, the man who'd taught Preston about honor and duty and doing what's right even when it's hard. What would his dad think of this? Of using stolen equipment to dig up graves, of hiring contractors who desecrated the dead? Preston stood, walked to the window, looked out at Billings sleeping under the Montana stars. Somewhere out there was the cemetery, the soldiers, the evidence of his failure. He'd been a Marine once, had served 2 tours in Iraq, had stood at attention while flag-draped coffins were loaded onto planes, had saluted brothers who'd paid the ultimate price. And now he was part of desecrating graves. Because of money, because of desperation, because he'd lost sight of what mattered. His phone buzzed, a text from his lawyer. "We filed the lawsuit, should buy us time to figure out our next move." Preston stared at the message. Time to figure out their next move. Like this was just business, just strategy, not a violation of everything he'd once believed in. He made a decision then, in the dark office overlooking the sleeping city. A decision that would cost him everything or save what was left of his soul. He wasn't sure which. But he knew what his father would want him to do, what the Marine he'd once been would demand. He picked up his phone, started making calls, not to lawyers or board members or investors, to Derek Mullins, to his conscience, to whatever was left of his honor. By dawn, he'd have a plan, not to win, but to make things right, whatever that cost him. The next evening, as the sun set over the Brennan Ranch, Preston Wolf drove up the long driveway. Unannounced, alone. No lawyers, no security, just him in a pickup truck looking tired and older than his 52 years. Jake met him on the porch. "You've got nerve showing up here. I've got a proposition. Can we talk? Just you and me, 5 minutes. Anything you say to me, you can say in front of everyone." "Fine." Preston looked past Jake, saw the others gathered in the doorway. "I didn't order that desecration. I didn't steal my own equipment. Someone's trying to frame me." "The GPS says otherwise," Claire called out. Preston's expression flickered. Surprise, then calculation. "You hacked my company servers. I accessed public data your company failed to secure. There's a difference. That data will never hold up in court. It's inadmissible." "Maybe, but it'll hold up in the press and in the court of public opinion, which is what really matters when you're trying to do business in a small state. Claire stepped forward. Here's what I think happened. You ordered the desecration, but you're too smart to do it directly. You used a cutout, someone with access to your equipment, someone you thought you could control, but they screwed up, left too much evidence. Now you're here trying to contain the damage. Preston was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Less corporate, more human. You're right, about most of it. I authorized a survey, just a survey, to verify the graves were real. I hired a contractor, gave him access to equipment, told him to be discreet. He wasn't. He got greedy, thought if he could prove the graves were fake, I'd give him a bonus, so he started digging. By the time I found out, it was too late. That's a convenient story, Ryan said. It's the truth, and I've got the contractor in my truck. He's willing to confess, take full responsibility. In exchange, I'll drop the lawsuit, leave you alone, walk away from this project entirely. Jake felt like he was missing something. Why? Why would you give up $200 million? Because I'm a veteran, Marines, 2 tours in Iraq, and what that contractor did to those graves, to those soldiers. Preston's voice cracked slightly. That's not who I am. That's not what I built my company to do. I made a mistake, trusted the wrong person, and now I'm trying to make it right. He walked back to his truck, opened the passenger door. A man climbed out, 35 maybe, scared. Preston brought him to the porch. Tell them. The man's name was Derek Mullins. He told them everything. How Preston had hired him for a geological survey. How he'd misunderstood the instructions. Thought he was supposed to discredit the cemetery. How he'd used the excavator without permission. How he'd panicked when the sheriff showed up and run. Left everything behind. His confessions spilled out in a rush. Desperate. Rehearsed but genuine enough. When he finished, Preston handed George a thumb drive. That's his signed confession, witnessed by my lawyer. He'll testify to whatever you need. In exchange, I want immunity for my company, and I want to walk away with my reputation intact. George took the drive. I'll need to verify this. Talk to the prosecutor, but if it's legitimate, we might have a deal. There's one more thing. Preston pulled out another document. I'm prepared to make a donation, $5 million to establish a foundation for the maintenance and preservation of the cemetery, for education programs about the POW camps, for outreach to families of the soldiers buried here. It's not perfect, but it's something. Margaret spoke for the first time. Why, what do you get out of this? Peace of mind, and maybe a chance to sleep at night knowing I didn't destroy something sacred for profit. Preston looked at each of them. I'm not a monster. I'm a businessman who made bad choices. I'd like the chance to make better ones. The silence stretched out. Jake watched Preston's face, saw something there he hadn't seen before. Regret, maybe, or shame. Real emotion under the corporate polish. He thought about Bill, about second chances, about how everyone makes mistakes and the measure of a man is how he fixes them. I want something else, Jake said. Beyond the foundation, beyond walking away. Name it. Help us find a way to develop the gas rights without disturbing the graves. Partner with Claire. Fund her research. Make this work the right way, even if it takes longer and costs more. Preston looked at Claire. You really think it's possible? I know it is. With the right technology and the right approach. It'll take 5 years instead of 2. It'll cost 40% more, but it can be done. And the revenue split? 60-40, 60 for the family, 40 for you. That's fair given you're taking the bigger risk. Preston did the math in his head. Even at 60-40 with higher costs and longer timeline, he'd still make tens of millions. Not hundreds, but enough. I'll need it in writing, full legal protection, environmental guarantees, control over the process. You'll have it, Claire said. I'll draft the proposal myself. Preston extended his hand to Jake. Deal? Jake looked at the hand, thought about everything that had happened. The graves, the lawsuit, the manipulation and pressure, and corporate games, but he also thought about Bill, about keeping promises, about doing what's right even when it's hard. He shook Preston's hand. Deal, but if you violate it, if you go back on your word, I'll make sure everyone knows, every veterans organization, every media outlet, every person who might ever do business with you. Understood. Derek Mullins gave his statement to Sheriff Davidson that night, confessed to unauthorized use of equipment, attempted destruction of property, desecration of graves. The charges would likely be reduced in exchange for testimony, but he'd have a record, face consequences. Preston Wolf would face civil penalties, fines, sanctions, but no criminal charges. He'd keep his company. His reputation would take a hit, but he'd survive. The lawsuit was withdrawn the next morning. The press conference George had planned became a celebration instead. They announced the historical registration of the cemetery, showed Frank Torres' journal to media, introduced Preston's foundation, presented it as a partnership, a way forward that honored the past while building the future. The story ran in newspapers across Montana, made national news for one cycle, then faded as newer stories took its place. But in the small world of the ranch, everything had changed. Margaret was no longer a secret. She was family, acknowledged, accepted. Claire was part of the legacy now, working to make Bill's land productive and protected. Ryan's ranch was saved. The $500,000 from Margaret had bought time. Now the gas development would eventually bring revenue. Not immediately, but eventually, enough to build something sustainable. And Jake had found something he didn't know he was looking for. Purpose, direction, a reason to get up in the morning that went beyond survival. He'd proven Bill right, proven he could be trusted to do the hard thing, the right thing. A week after the settlement, Jake drove out to the cemetery alone. Someone had replanted the crosses that were damaged, filled in the excavated graves. The place looked peaceful again, like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. He stood at the edge of the clearing, thought about the men buried here, about Bill who'd protected them, about Ruth who'd loved Bill, about Margaret who'd forgiven him, about Claire who was building on his legacy, about Ryan who'd learned that some things were worth more than money, about himself, the man who'd arrived in Montana lost and broken, who'd found family in secrets and purpose, in promises made by the dead. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "I heard about what you did, the cemetery, the fight. I'm proud of you." Jake stared at those words. I'm proud of you. When was the last time anyone had said that? When was the last time he deserved it? He typed back, "Thanks, I'm proud of me too. First time in a long time." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Maybe we could talk sometime, really talk. No lawyers, just us." "I'd like that." The conversation ended there. No promises, no commitments. Just the possibility of something, which was more than Jake had 3 days ago, more than he'd had in years. He walked among the graves one last time, said a silent thank you to men he'd never met, soldiers who'd died far from home and been forgotten by everyone except one stubborn Marine who believed everyone deserved to be remembered. Then he walked back to his truck, drove toward the ranch house, toward family gathered around a kitchen table, toward Margaret and Claire and Ryan and Frank, toward George on speakerphone giving legal advice, toward coffee that was too strong and conversations that ran too long and the comfortable chaos of people learning to be together, toward home. Not the home he'd left, but the home he was building. One choice at a time, one promise kept, one hard thing done right. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors that seemed impossible, orange and purple and gold. Montana showing off again, making sure nobody forgot who was in charge. Jake drove through that light, toward whatever came next, toward the life Bill had trusted him to build. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt ready to do the work, face the challenges, keep the promises, honor the past while building the future. Be the man Bill believed he could be, the man he'd forgotten he was, but was learning to become again. 3 months passed like water through fingers. Spring came to Montana with that sudden violence it always did, snow melting off the mountains, creeks running high and fast, the valley turning green almost overnight, life pushing through frozen ground because life always found a way. Jake stood in the newly rebuilt barn watching Claire present her development plan to a room full of people who'd flown in from Denver and Houston and Seattle, engineers, geologists, environmental consultants, all of them nodding as she explained horizontal drilling techniques and carbon capture protocols and sustainable extraction methods that would protect the cemetery while accessing the gas beneath. She'd spent 3 months on this, 70 pages of technical specifications, environmental impact studies, financial projections, partnership structures. It was brilliant work, the kind of thing universities would study and corporations would copy. And she was 28 years old presenting it like she'd been doing it her whole life. Preston Wolfe sat in the front row, taking notes, asking questions. He'd changed since that night on the porch. Looked older, moved slower, like he'd been carrying weight and finally put it down. He'd kept every promise, funded Claire's research, established the foundation, even showed up to help repair the damaged crosses, got his hands dirty and his knees muddy kneeling in the cemetery dirt. The total development timeline is 63 months, Claire said, 5 years and 3 months from permits to production. Initial costs are estimated at $240 million, but the environmental protections mean we can operate for 30 years instead of 15. The long-term revenue more than compensates for the higher upfront investment. One of the Houston engineers raised his hand. What about the graves themselves? Any risk of subsidence or structural damage? We've mapped every burial site with ground-penetrating radar. The drilling paths avoid them by minimum safe distances. We'll also install monitoring equipment to detect any ground movement. If there's even a hint of instability, we shut down immediately. Another question, another answer. Claire handled it all with the calm confidence of someone who knew her material inside and out. Jake felt proud, which was strange because he'd only known her for 3 months. But family wasn't about time. Bill had taught him that. Family was about who showed up when it mattered. Margaret sat next to Jake. She'd moved to Missoula 2 months ago, bought a small house 5 miles from the ranch, said she'd spent enough of her life away from family. Wasn't going to waste whatever time she had left. She volunteered at the VA hospital 3 days a week, cooked Sunday dinners for everyone, filled a space in their lives nobody had known was empty. The presentation ended, handshakes all around, contracts would be drafted, lawyers would review. But the foundation was solid. Claire had done what seemed impossible, found a way to honor Bill's promise while creating something valuable, something that would outlast all of them. After the engineers left, Jake found Claire outside sitting on a hay bale and staring at the mountains. She looked exhausted, satisfied but exhausted. "You did good in there," he said. "We'll see. Still 100 ways this could fall apart. But it won't. You built it too well." Claire smiled. Bill would have liked this. The compromise, the balance, using the land without destroying it. He would have loved it, and he would have loved you. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came between people who'd been through fire together. Around them, the ranch was coming back to life. Ryan had used Margaret's loan to modernize the cattle operation, installed new water systems, rotational grazing. The land looked healthier than it had in years. The cattle looked better. Even Ryan looked better, less haunted, more present, more. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said. "Why did you stay? You could have left after the settlement, gone back to Detroit, started over somewhere else. But you're still here." Jake thought about that, about the studio apartment in Detroit he'd given up, the rental car he'd returned, the life that had felt like a coat that didn't fit. "I stayed because this is the first place I've felt useful in years. The first place that needed me for something other than what I could do. It needed me for who I could be." "And who's that?" "I'm still figuring it out." His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. They'd been talking more. Careful conversations that circled around the past without diving into it. She'd visited once. Drove up from Seattle where she'd taken a position at a research hospital. They'd walked around the ranch. Talked about Bill, about the cemetery, about second chances. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was something. The text said, "I have a 3-day weekend next month. Mind if I come visit again?" Jake typed back, "You're always welcome." 3 dots. Then, "Good, because I miss you, the you you're becoming, not the you that you were." He stared at those words for a long time. The you you're becoming, like he was still in process, still being built. Which maybe everyone was. Maybe nobody ever finished becoming. They just kept working at it until they ran out of time. That evening, they gathered at Margaret's house for dinner. It had become tradition. Sunday nights, everyone around her table. Margaret cooking enough food for twice as many people. Ryan and his wife Karen. Their son Tommy, who just turned 17 and was talking about studying agriculture at Montana State. Claire. Frank Torres, who'd become a permanent fixture. George Coleman when he wasn't traveling. And Jake. The conversation flowed easily now. comfortable. Stories about Bill, plans for the ranch, Tommy's college applications, Karen's new job teaching at the elementary school. Normal family things, the kind Jake had forgotten existed. After dinner, Frank pulled Jake aside, led him to Margaret's small study, closed the door. The old veteran looked serious, troubled. "There's something you need to know," Frank said. "Something I should have told you months ago but wasn't sure how." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "What?" "Bill left something else. Not in the safe, not in the will. Something he gave me. Made me promise not to share unless—" Frank stopped, started again. "Unless you proved you could be trusted." "I don't understand." Frank pulled a key from his pocket. Old brass, worn smooth by years of handling. "There's a storage unit in Billings. Bill rented it in 1991. Paid 30 years in advance. This is the key. He said if you found Margaret and protected the cemetery and kept the family together, I should give it to you." "What's in it?" "I don't know. Bill never told me. Just said it was the last piece, the final truth, and that you'd know what to do with it." Jake took the key. It was warm from Frank's hand, heavy with implication. "Why now? Why not 3 months ago?" "Because 3 months ago you were still figuring out who you were. Now you know. Or you're close enough." Frank put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Bill believed in you, even when you didn't believe in yourself. Don't make him wrong." The drive to Billings took 3 hours. Jake went alone. Didn't tell anyone where he was going or why. Just got in his truck at dawn and drove east across Montana. The landscape changed as he went, from mountains to plains, from forest to grassland. Big sky getting bigger until it felt like the earth was curving away in every direction. The storage facility was on the industrial edge of town. Rows of orange metal units behind chain link fence. Jake found Unit 217. The key fit the lock. The mechanism was stiff from years of disuse, but it turned. The door rolled up with a screech of metal on metal. Inside was darkness. Jake found a light switch. Fluorescent tubes flickered to life. The unit was maybe 10 by 10, nearly empty. Just a metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a large cardboard box sitting in the center of the concrete floor. Jake approached the box carefully, like it might explode. Written on the side in Bill's handwriting, "For Jake, when you're ready, I hope this helps you understand." He opened it. Inside were more journals, dozens of them. Bill's handwriting filling page after page. Not the careful documentation of the cemetery. Something else, something personal. Jake pulled out the top journal, opened to a random page, started reading. March 15th, 1987. Saw Margaret today, from a distance. She was at the grocery store with her children. I stayed in my truck, watched her load bags into her car. She looked happy, healthy. The boy must be 5 now, the girl's younger. They were laughing about something, normal family moment. I wanted to go to her, introduce myself. But what would I say? "Hello, I'm the father who gave you away?" So I just watched, then drove home. Elizabeth asked where I'd been. I lied, said I was checking cattle prices. The lies get easier every year. That scares me. Jake sat down on the concrete floor. He couldn't read all 10,000 pages. Didn't need to. He picked journals at random, skipped through decades, read entries from different years. The pattern became clear. Every page was the same story told different ways. Guilt, regret, secret watching, the weight of choices made. But there was more than just entries about Margaret. There were entries about the ranch, about Elizabeth, about raising his children, about the moments of joy mixed with the constant undercurrent of secret sorrow, about lying to everyone he loved while trying to protect the one person he'd failed. June 3rd, 1995. Elizabeth found old photos today from Korea. She asked about Ruth. I told her the truth, or part of it, that I'd been married before, that my wife died. But I didn't tell her about Margaret. Couldn't. Elizabeth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "We all have parts of our past we carry alone. I understand." I wanted to tell her everything, but the words wouldn't come. So I just held her and wondered if silence is the same as lying. Jake flipped through more journals, sampling entries across the decades. He didn't read every page. Couldn't. There were too many. But he read enough to understand the pattern, enough to see Bill's pain, enough to know that keeping these would only perpetuate the suffering. But they also showed a man trying trying to be better, trying to make up for his failures in small ways. The cemetery wasn't just about honoring dead soldiers. It was about honoring a promise, proving to himself that he could keep a commitment, that he could protect something even when it was hard. The last journal was different, recent. The entries from the final year of Bill's life, the handwriting shakier, the thoughts more circular, but the message clearer. January 10th, 2024. I'm dying. Doctor confirmed it. 6 months maybe. Brain tumor. Inoperable. I could fight it with radiation, but what's the point? I'm 87. I've had a good run, longer than Ruth, longer than many, but I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving things unfinished. Margaret deserves to know her family. The cemetery deserves protection. The truth deserves to be told. I can't do it. Don't have time. Don't have courage. So I'm leaving it to Jake. He's the only one who'll understand. The only one who knows what it's like to be lost, to need a purpose, to need to prove you're more than your worst moment. I'm giving him that chance. I'm trusting him to finish what I couldn't. I hope he forgives me for the burden, but more than that, I hope he rises to meet it, because I believe in him, even if he doesn't believe in himself. Jake closed the journal, sat in the dim storage unit surrounded by a dead man's confessions. Bill had known, had planned it all. The safe under the barn, the trust for Margaret, the cemetery documentation with Frank. Even this storage unit, pieces of a puzzle arranged to test Jake, to give him a reason to be better than he'd been. And it had worked. Jake had found Margaret, protected the cemetery, brought the family together, done everything Bill had hoped, but at what cost? He'd disrupted lives, forced secrets into light, made people face truths they'd been comfortable ignoring. His phone rang, Margaret's number. He answered. Jake, where are you? We were supposed to meet for dinner. I'm in Billings. I'm sorry. I should have called. Is everything okay? Jake looked at the box of journals, at the evidence of Bill's decades of secret pain. I found something Bill left. I need to decide what to do with it. Silence on the other end. Then, does it change anything? No, but it explains everything. Then maybe it's time to stop explaining and start living. Bill spent his whole life looking backward. You don't have to. The wisdom in those words hit Jake hard. Margaret had every right to be angry, to demand answers, to make Bill's memory pay for his mistakes. But instead, she was offering grace, forgiveness, permission to move forward. You're right, Jake said. I'm coming home. Good. We'll keep dinner warm. Jake loaded the journals into his truck, locked the storage unit, drove back across Montana as the sun set behind him. The sky turned colors that didn't seem real, purple and orange and gold bleeding into darkness. By the time he reached Missoula, stars were out, thick and bright and close enough to touch. Margaret's house was lit up, cars in the driveway, people visible through the windows, family gathered and waiting. Jake sat in his truck for a moment, thought about Bill, about the man who'd carried secrets until they crushed him, about the choice to hold on or let go. Then he got out, walked to the door, went inside. They were all there. Margaret and Claire and Ryan and Karen and Tommy, Frank and George, even Preston Wolf, who'd somehow become part of this strange extended family. They looked up when Jake entered, saw something in his face. Questions formed, but nobody asked. I found Bill's journals, Jake said, 30 years of them. Everything he never said out loud, everything he kept hidden. Margaret stood, and I think we should burn them. The room went silent. Margaret walked to Jake, looked up at him with those eyes that were Bill's eyes. Because Bill spent his whole life trapped by his past, writing it down, analyzing it, trying to understand it. But understanding doesn't change what happened. It just keeps you stuck. Jake pulled out one journal, held it up. He wanted me to have these, to know the truth, but I think the real truth is simpler. He made mistakes. He tried to fix them. He did the best he could. That's enough. We don't need to dissect every moment of pain to honor his memory. Claire stepped forward. What if there's important information in there? Things we should know? There isn't. Trust me, it's just a man torturing himself over choices he couldn't undo. Learning from that doesn't require preserving it. Frank spoke up. Bill gave those to you. They're yours to do with as you see fit. Jake looked at Margaret. The decision really belonged to her. She was the one Bill had written about, the one most affected by his choices. She walked to Jake, took the journal from his hands, opened it, read a few entries. Her face showed nothing. Then she closed it, handed it back. Jake's right. My father spent too long living in regret. We don't have to do the same. She looked around the room. We could spend years reading these, picking apart every decision, judging him by standards he couldn't meet. Or we could let it go. Remember him for what he built instead of what he lost. So we burn them? Ryan asked. We burned them, Margaret confirmed. They built a fire in Margaret's backyard fire pit, the kind of fire you build on clear nights when the stars are out and the air is still. Jake brought the journals box by box. 33 journals total. Nearly 10,000 pages of confession and regret and secret sorrow. One by one, they fed them to the flames, watched the pages curl and blacken and turn to ash. Watched Bill's pain transform into smoke that rose into the Montana night and disappeared among the stars. It felt ceremonial, sacred, like releasing a spirit that had been trapped too long. Margaret threw in the last journal, stood watching it burn. Tears tracked down her face, but she was smiling. Goodbye, Dad. You're free now. They stood around the fire until it burned down to embers, until the journals were nothing but ash and memory. Then they went inside, ate the dinner that had gone cold, talked about other things, about Claire's project timeline, about Tommy's college visits, about the spring planting schedule, about life moving forward because that's what life did. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, Jake sat on Margaret's porch. She brought him coffee, sat in the chair beside him. Thank you, she said, for burning them, for not making me read them. You had the right. I had the right to move on, to not carry his burden. She sipped her coffee. Do you know why I forgave him so easily when he first wrote to me? No, because holding on to anger would have meant letting him control my life even after he was gone. And he'd controlled enough by giving me up, by staying away, by making choices that affected me without my input. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me. Jake thought about that, about Sarah, about the anger he'd carried over the divorce, the bitterness, the sense of failure. It hadn't hurt Sarah, it had only hurt him. Kept him stuck in a moment he couldn't change. I need to talk to Sarah, he said. Really talk. Not just text, not just surface conversations. Yes, you do. What if it doesn't work? What if we're too broken? Margaret smiled. Then at least you tried. At least you were brave enough to be honest. That's all anyone can do. The next morning, Jake drove to the cemetery. Someone had planted flowers, wildflowers that would spread and naturalize, turn the clearing into something beautiful. A stone monument had been erected, simple, elegant, names of all the soldiers carved into black granite. At the top, an inscription, "Here rest soldiers far from home, honored by William Brennan, who understood that all warriors deserve respect. May they find peace in this Montana earth." Below that, a second inscription, "Protected by those who followed, remembered by those who care, never forgotten." Jake stood reading the names, thought about Bill kneeling in this dirt, repairing crosses, keeping promises to men who'd never know. Thought about the kind of strength that took, the quiet courage of doing right when nobody was watching. His phone rang. Sarah's number. He answered. "Hey," she said. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Is this a good time?" "Perfect time. I've been thinking about us, about what went wrong and what might go right." She paused. "I think we should try again. Not jump back in, just try. See if we can build something new instead of trying to fix something broken." Jake felt something loosen in his chest. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "I'd like that, but Sarah, I need to tell you something first. I'm not moving back to Detroit. Montana is home now. This is where I need to be." More silence. Jake braced for disappointment, for the conversation to end before it started. But Sarah surprised him. "I know, and I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking if there's room here for me, too. Part-time at first, weekends, holidays, but maybe more eventually if it works." "There's room. There's always been room. I just had to find it. Then I'm coming up next weekend, and we're going to talk, really talk, about everything we never said, everything we were too scared to admit. No more running, no more hiding, just honesty." "Okay. Okay. I love you, Jake. The you you're becoming. I want to see where that goes. I love you too." The call ended. Jake stood in the cemetery surrounded by evidence of choices and consequences and the weight of history. But he didn't feel burdened. He felt free. Bill had given him that. not through the land or the money or the secrets, but through the example, through showing that it's never too late to try, to fight for what matters, to become someone worth being. That afternoon, Jake met with Claire and Preston and the engineering team, signed contracts that would take 5 years to fulfill, committed to a partnership that would extend beyond his lifetime, left something for the generations that would come after. Not just resources or revenue, but a model, a way of doing things that honored both past and future. Ryan joined them afterward. They walked the property together, talked about next steps, about how the drilling would be staged, about monitoring and safeguards and contingency plans. But mostly they talked about the ranch, about keeping it whole, about passing it down better than they'd found it. Bill would be proud, Ryan said, of all this, of what we built. We're not done building yet. No, but we're headed the right way. That evening, Jake drove to the ridge above the ranch, the highest point on the property, where you could see the valley spread out below and the mountains rising beyond. Bill used to come here, said it helped him think, helped him remember why the land mattered. Jake stood in the same spot, watched the same sunset, felt connected to something larger than himself. Not just to Bill, but to everyone who'd worked this land, who'd loved it and fought for it and passed it down. He was part of that chain now, a link between what was and what would be. His phone buzzed, a photo from Sarah, her smiling in front of a "Welcome to Montana" sign. Caption, "Coming home early, couldn't wait, see you in 6 hours." Jake smiled, started the drive back to the ranch house, back to family and dinner and the comfortable chaos of people learning to be together. Back to Margaret telling stories and Claire talking science and Ryan arguing politics and Frank offering wisdom nobody asked for. Back to life. Not the life he'd planned, not the life he'd imagined, but the life he'd built. One choice at a time, one promise kept, one hard thing done right. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, the valley filled with shadow. But Jake kept driving toward the light still glowing in the windows, toward home, toward family, toward the man Bill had believed he could be, the man he was finally becoming. Sarah arrived as the sun was setting. Jake watched her car come up the long driveway, dust rising behind it in the golden light. She parked next to his truck, got out slowly, stood there for a moment looking at the ranch house, at the mountains beyond, at the life Jake had built in the months since she'd last seen him. She looked different, or maybe Jake was seeing her differently. Her hair was longer. She wore jeans and boots instead of the professional clothes he remembered. She looked younger somehow, less burdened, like she'd shed weight Jake hadn't known she was carrying. They met halfway between the vehicles, stood facing each other. The last time they'd been this close was in that diner in Detroit, signing papers, ending things. Now they were here, starting over, or trying to. "Hey," she said. "Hey, this place is beautiful. It grows on you." Sarah smiled. "Can I see it? The cemetery, the land Bill protected? I want to understand what you've been fighting for." Jake drove her out in the truck. The evening light made everything softer. The mountains less harsh, the valley more welcoming. They didn't talk much, just let the landscape speak for itself. When they reached the cemetery, Sarah got out and walked among the graves, read the names on the monument, touched the stone gently. "He kept this place for 60 years, she said, without telling anyone, without expecting credit. He made a promise to himself, to them. He kept it, and now you're keeping it for him. Trying to." Sarah turned to face Jake. "You're different since Detroit, since the divorce. You were lost then, angry at yourself mostly, but lost. Now you're here, present, like you finally figured out where you belong." "I did. Took me long enough. Better late than never." She walked back to him, stood close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same one she'd always worn. "I was angry too, at you for giving up, at myself for not knowing how to help, at us for failing. We didn't fail, we just ended. Sometimes things end, doesn't mean they were failures. But what if they don't have to stay ended?" Jake looked at her, really looked, saw hope in her eyes, and fear, the same hope and fear he felt. "What are you asking, Sarah?" "I'm asking if we can try again, slowly, carefully, not trying to rebuild what we had, but building something new with the people we are now instead of the people we were." "I'd like that, but you need to know. This place, Montana, the ranch, the family, This is my life now. I'm not leaving. I know, and I'm not asking you to. I'm asking if there's room for me in it. There's room. Always has been. I just had to clear out the clutter to see it. They kissed, soft and tentative, like teenagers on a first date. It felt different than before. Less desperate, more intentional. Like they were choosing each other instead of just falling together. When they pulled apart, Sarah was crying. I missed you, the real you, not the ghost you became. I missed me too. They drove back to the ranch house. Margaret had prepared a feast. She always did when people were coming. The table was covered with dishes, roast beef and potatoes and vegetables from the garden she'd started, homemade bread still warm from the oven, pie cooling on the counter. Everyone was there, the whole strange extended family they'd assembled from secrets and choices and Bill's careful planning. Margaret and Claire and Ryan and Karen and Tommy, Frank and George, even Preston, who'd become a regular despite having no blood connection. Just a shared commitment to doing something right. They made room for Sarah, pulled up another chair, passed dishes and told stories and laughed about things that had seemed tragic when they were happening, but were funny now, with distance. Sarah fit in easily, asked questions, listened to answers, smiled at Jake across the table in a way that made his chest tight. After dinner, Tommy cornered Jake in the kitchen. The kid was washing dishes, had gotten tall in the past few months, almost 6 feet, starting to look like a man instead of a boy. Can I ask you something? Tommy said. Sure. Do you think Great-Grandpa Bill was a good man? With everything he did, the secrets and the lies and giving away his daughter. Can someone who does that still be good? Jake dried a plate, thought about the question, about Bill's journals burning in Margaret's fire pit, about decades of regret and the weight of impossible choices. I think he was a man, just a man. He made mistakes, big ones, but he spent his whole life trying to make up for them, trying to be better. That's all any of us can do. But he hurt people, Aunt Margaret, Grandma Elizabeth, everyone who didn't know the truth. He did, and that matters. But he also protected people, kept promises, built something that lasted. People are complicated, Tommy. We're not heroes or villains. We're just people doing the best we can with what we've got. Tommy was quiet for a moment, then, I want to study land management, like Claire. Learn how to take care of places. Make them better instead of using them up. That's good, important work. Dad wants me to take over the ranch. Keep it in the family. But I don't know if that's what I want. I don't know if I'm good enough. Jake turned to face the kid, saw the doubt there, the fear of disappointing people, of not measuring up. He recognized it, had felt it himself for years. You know what Bill told me once? He said the land doesn't care who owns it. It only cares who tends it. You don't have to take over the ranch to honor it. You just have to care about it, whatever form that takes. What if I fail? What if I make the wrong choice? Then you make another choice. That's the thing about life. You keep getting chances until you don't. The trick is to take them. Tommy smiled, went back to washing dishes. Jake watched him for a moment, saw the next generation forming, learning, growing, carrying forward what Bill had started. Not perfectly, but genuinely. That was enough. Later, Jake and Sarah walked out to the ridge, the place where Bill used to think. Stars were out, thick and bright in the Montana sky. Away from city lights, you could see the Milky Way, that river of stars stretching across the darkness. Proof that Earth was just a small thing in a vast universe. Tell me about him, Sarah said. About Bill, the real story. Jake told her everything. About Ruth and Margaret and the 60-year secret. About the cemetery and the promises and the weight of choices made by a 26-year-old kid who'd lost his wife and didn't know what else to do. About the journals and the burning and the decision to let it all go. Sarah listened without interrupting. When Jake finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, he gave you a gift. What gift? Purpose, direction, a reason to be better than you were. Most people search their whole lives for that. Bill handed it to you through the mystery, through the challenge. He made you into the man you needed to be by believing you already were. Jake had never thought of it that way, but she was right. Bill hadn't saved him, hadn't fixed him, had just created conditions where Jake could save himself. He trusted me when I didn't trust me. That's love, real love, not the easy kind, the kind that costs something. They sat on the ridge until the cold drove them back, found everyone gathered in the living room. fire crackling in the stone fireplace. Margaret was showing old photos to Claire. Ryan and Preston were arguing good-naturedly about drilling timelines. Karen was helping Tommy with college essays. Frank and George were playing chess in the corner. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. Americana. The kind of scene people thought didn't exist anymore. But here it was, imperfect and real and good. Jake and Sarah joined them, found space on the couch, settled in. And for the first time in longer than Jake could remember, he felt complete, not fixed, not healed, but whole. Like all the broken pieces had found their way back together in a new configuration that actually worked. That night, lying in bed in the ranch house, Jake couldn't sleep. Too much happening, too many thoughts. He got up, walked to Bill's old study. The room hadn't been changed much. Books still on the shelves, desks still in the corner, photos still on the walls. It felt like Bill might walk in any moment, sit in his chair, start working on ranch accounts. Jake sat at the desk, opened the drawer, found paper and a pen, started writing. Dear Bill, I know you're gone. I know you can't read this, but I need to say it anyway. Thank you for the mystery, for the challenge, for believing I was worth saving even when I'd given up on myself. You left me a mess, a beautiful, complicated, impossible mess. And in sorting through it, I found my way back. Found family I didn't know existed. Found purpose I'd forgotten I needed. Found myself again. You were right. I could handle it. I could do what needed doing. I just needed the chance. You gave me that, and I'm trying to pay it forward, to be for others what you were for me. A steady presence, a believer, someone who sees what people could be instead of what they are. I'm not perfect at it, but I'm trying. That's all you ever asked. I miss you. I wish I'd told you that while you could hear it, but I think you knew. I think that's why you left me the key. Not to find treasure, but to find myself. Rest easy, old man. I've got it from here. Your grandson, Jake. He folded the letter, put it in an envelope, walked out to the fire pit where they'd burned the journals. The ashes were still there, cold and gray in the moonlight. Jake burned the letter, watched it curl and blacken and disappear, sending it wherever Bill had gone. If there was an afterlife, maybe he'd get it. If not, at least Jake had said what needed saying. The next morning was Sunday, Margaret's day for cooking. Jake found her in the kitchen before dawn, kneading bread dough. She smiled when she saw him. Couldn't sleep? Too much thinking. Want to help? I'm making cinnamon rolls. They worked in comfortable silence. Margaret rolling dough, Jake mixing filling. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and butter and home. Outside, the world was still dark. But in here, light pushed back the shadows. Can I ask you something, Jake said. Do you ever regret it? Forgiving Bill so easily? Not making him pay for giving you up? Margaret considered the question, kept working the dough as she thought. Regret is a luxury I can't afford. I'm 71 years old. I've got maybe 10 good years left if I'm lucky. I can spend them angry at a dead man for choices he made when I was a baby. Or I can spend them with family, building relationships, making memories. The choice seems pretty clear. But doesn't part of you wish he'd been braver? Kept you instead of giving you away? Of course, but wishes don't change the past. And honestly, if he'd kept me, my life would have been harder. Growing up mixed race in rural Montana in the 50s and 60s, I would have faced prejudice, isolation, maybe worse. The Sullivans gave me a good life. Bill made sure I was provided for. He did what he thought was best. Was it perfect? No, but it was enough. She shaped the dough into rolls, placed them in pans. Besides, if he'd kept me, I wouldn't have met my husband, wouldn't have had my children, wouldn't have Claire. All the good in my life came from that decision. So how can I hate him for it? I don't know if I could be that forgiving. You already are. You forgave Sarah for leaving. You're giving her another chance. That takes the same kind of grace. Jake helped Margaret put the rolls in the oven. They made coffee, sat at the kitchen table watching the sun rise through the window. Outside, the valley was turning gold. Light spreading across the land Bill had loved, the land Jake was learning to love the same way. What will you do? Margaret asked. Long term, you can't live on the ranch forever. You need your own place, your own life. I've been thinking about that. There's a piece of land, 20 acres on the western edge of the property. Ryan said I could buy it, build something, make it mine. And Sarah? She's taking a job at the hospital in Missoula, starting in 3 months, selling her place in Seattle, moving here. We're going to try, see if we can build something that works this time. Margaret reached across the table, took his hand. Bill would be proud of all of it, but especially of you becoming the kind of man who stays, who builds, who keeps promises. The rest of the family arrived throughout the morning. By noon, the house was full again. The kitchen table extended with leaves. Chairs borrowed from the barn. Everyone squeezed in, passing dishes, telling stories, arguing about nothing important. Frank stood and tapped his glass. I'd like to make a toast to Bill, who brought us all together in the strangest way possible, through secrets and mysteries and impossible challenges. He was a complicated man, but he was our complicated man, and we're better for having known him. To Bill, they echoed. George stood next. And to Jake, for having the courage to see Bill's plan through, for finding Margaret, for protecting the cemetery, for keeping the family together. Bill chose well. Jake felt his face get hot, didn't know what to say, but Margaret saved him. To all of us, she said, for choosing to be family. Blood matters, but choice matters more. We chose to be here, to work together, to build something good from something complicated. That's what Bill wanted. That's what we're giving him. They drank. Then the conversation moved on to Claire's project timeline, to Tommy's college applications, to Ryan's plans for expanding the organic cattle operation, to Preston's foundation work, bringing families to visit the cemetery, to Frank's health and George's upcoming retirement and Karen's promotion at school. Normal family things, the kind that seemed mundane but were actually everything. The fabric of life, the threads that connected people across time and distance and difference. After lunch, Jake walked out to the barn with Ryan. They'd been talking about the 20 acres, about what Jake might build there. Ryan had ideas, too many ideas. You should build big, Ryan said. Room for Sarah, room for kids if that happens, room for family when they visit. I'm not sure we need that much house. You never know where life goes. Better to have space and not need it than need space and not have it. They walked to the western edge of the property. The 20 acres sat on a gentle slope. Views of the mountains, creek running through the back corner. Perfect building site. Jake could see it already. A house, not huge but solid, built to last, windows facing the sunrise, porch for watching sunsets. I want to do it right, Jake said, like Bill would have. Not fast, not cheap, but right. Then we'll help, everyone. We'll make it a project, something we build together. That evening, as people were leaving, Claire pulled Jake aside. She had papers, contracts. We got final approval, she said. All permits, all environmental clearances. We start drilling next month. That fast? Preston pushed it through, called in favors, made it happen. We're on track for production within 4 years. The first revenue should come within 5. And the cemetery? Protected in perpetuity, legal designation as historical site, state and federal protection. Nobody can touch it, ever. Jake felt something settle, the last piece falling into place. Bill would be happy. He'd be thrilled. We did it, Jake. We actually did it. Found a way to honor the past and build the future. After everyone left, Jake and Sarah sat on the porch. The sun was setting. Again. It always did. That reliable cycle. Darkness and light. Endings and beginnings. I've been thinking, Sarah said, about us, about what we want this to be. And I don't want to rush, don't want to pretend the past didn't happen. We hurt each other. We failed each other. We need to acknowledge that. Okay. But I also don't want to be stuck there. I want to move forward, try again, be better this time. What does that look like? Sarah turned to face him. It looks like honesty, complete honesty, about what we want, what we need, what scares us. No more hiding, no more pretending we're fine when we're not. I can do that. Good. Then I'll start. I'm scared. Scared this won't work. Scared I'll lose you again. Scared I'm making a mistake moving here. But I'm more scared of not trying, of wondering what if. So I'm here, and I'm all in. Are you? Jake thought about Bill, about the courage it took to keep a promise for 60 years, about the strength required to face your mistakes and try to make them right, about the choice between easy and right. I'm all in, he said, but I need to tell you something too. I'm not the same man you married. I'm not who I was in Detroit. I'm still figuring out who I am now. And that might be hard, might be messy. I don't want the man you were. I want the man you're becoming. That's who I'm choosing. They sat in silence, holding hands, watching the light fade, and Jake felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of rightness, of being exactly where he was supposed to be. That night, Jake dreamed of Bill. They were standing in the cemetery. The crosses were new, the grass green. Bill looked young, healthy, like he must have looked when he first bought this land in 1978. You did good, son, Bill said. Better than I hoped. I just followed the map you left. No, you made your own path, used my map as a starting point. But where you ended up, that's all you. I couldn't have done it without you. Sure you could. You just needed a reason. I gave you that. But the strength, the courage, the choice to do right when you could have done easy, that was you. What happens now? Bill smiled. Now you live, you build, you love, you make mistakes and fix them. You keep promises, you become the man you're meant to be. Not perfect, just good. That's all anyone can ask. Will I see you again? Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't matter. I'm not gone. I'm in the land, in the family, in the choices you make. That's how we live on, through the people we touch. Jake woke up. The room was dark. Sarah was asleep beside him. He could hear her breathing, steady, peaceful. He got up carefully, walked to the window, looked out at the ranch spread below, at the mountains black against the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there was the cemetery, the graves Bill had protected, the promise he'd kept, the legacy he'd left. And Jake was part of that now. Guardian and keeper, builder and protector, link in a chain that stretched back generations and would continue forward long after he was gone. He thought about the house he'd build, the life he'd live, the family he'd keep, the promises he'd make and keep. It wouldn't be easy, but easy wasn't the point. Right was the point. Good was the point. Lasting was the point. Jake went back to bed, lay in the darkness, thought about Bill's last words in the dream. Not gone, just changed. Living on through the people he'd touched, through the choices they made, through the legacy they carried forward. Maybe that was heaven. Not a place you went, but a thing you became, a memory preserved, a story told, an influence that rippled out long after your body turned to dust. If so, Bill was in heaven, living in this ranch, in the cemetery he'd protected, in Margaret's forgiveness, in Claire's work, in Ryan's stewardship, in Jake's choices. In every moment they chose right over easy, love over fear, building over destroying. Jake closed his eyes, felt Sarah beside him, felt the weight of the ranch around him, felt the future opening up like a road stretching toward the horizon. Unknown but navigable, scary but possible. He thought about the letter he'd burned, the words he'd sent to wherever Bill had gone. I've got it from here. That was the promise, the vow, the commitment to carry forward what Bill had started. And Jake meant it, with everything he had, with everything he was becoming. He'd keep the cemetery, protect the land, honor the past, build the future, love Sarah, support Margaret, guide Tommy, work with Claire, stand beside Ryan, be part of this family Billy had assembled from secrets and choices and the careful architecture of a man trying to make things right. It was a big promise, a hard promise, the kind that would take his whole life to keep. But that was okay, because he had a whole life to give. And for the first time in years, that life felt like something worth living. The darkness outside began to lighten, dawn coming again, the way it always did, reliable, predictable. A new day, a new chance, a new opportunity to be better than yesterday. Jake got up, dressed quietly, walked out into the breaking dawn, drove to the ridge, the place where Bill used to think, where Jake came to remember why this all mattered. The sun broke over the mountains, light flooding the valley, turning everything gold. Jake stood in that light, felt it warm his face, and he understood finally what Bill had been trying to teach him. That legacy wasn't about what you left behind. It was about what you built forward. That family wasn't just blood, it was choice. That home wasn't a place, it was a feeling. That peace wasn't the absence of struggle, it was the presence of purpose. And that love, real love, the kind that lasted, the kind that mattered, wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence, about showing up, about trying again even after you'd failed, about keeping promises even when they cost you everything. Bill had shown him that, through the mystery, through the challenge, through the trust placed in someone who'd forgotten he was trustworthy. Now it was Jake's turn to show others, to be for them what Bill had been for him, to believe when they'd stopped believing, to see what they could be instead of what they were, to create conditions where they could save themselves. The sun climbed higher, the valley woke up, cattle moving, birds singing, life continuing its ancient rhythms. And Jake stood on the ridge, watching it all, knowing he was part of it, knowing he belonged. This was home, this was family, this was the life Bill had trusted him to build. And he was building it, one choice at a time, one promise kept, one sunrise at a time. The last promise wasn't just Bill's to keep, it was Jake's to carry forward. And he would, for the rest of his life. For as long as the sun rose over Montana, for as long as the mountains stood, for as long as his name was remembered, and his choices mattered, and his life made a difference, he would keep the promise, the last promise. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough.